Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 7 haunted cemeteries in Texas you should never visit. We step through the rusted gates of burial grounds where names are carved in stone. Flowers wither overnight and the earth itself remembers what we try to forget. These are chilling accounts of bells that toll without wind, whispers leaking from cracked mausoleums, and footsteps echoing across gravel paths when you know you are utterly alone. This is a new channel, and my goal this month is to reach 3,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers watch and leave without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Subscribe now. Before we begin, share in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there is a cemetery in your town that unsettles you, type its name, because once you step past the gates of these haunted resting grounds, not everything allows you to leave. Kill the lights. Silence the world. Take a slow breath, and let us begin. I don't believe in curses. I believe in soil tests and survey lines and money. That's why I took the night security job for the new development on the edge of Crosby. It paid better than my day work loading pallets, and all I had to do, according to the site manager, was keep kids from joyriding the gravel roads and scare off anyone stealing copper. Easy, he said. Just you, a flashlight, and a thermos. He didn't mention the cemetery. He didn't have to. Everyone in town already knew about Black Hope. They called it old ground, which is a polite way to say leave it alone. But the developer didn't. They carved cul-de-sacs out of scrub oak and pine, poured foundations that cracked the same week, and kept building anyway. They put up glossy signs with names like Whispering Oaks and Willow Ridge, names that sounded like lies even when you said them slow. At twilight, the houses looked pretty, framed against a purple sky, streetlights coming on one by one. By midnight, they looked like teeth, empty smiles. 30 lots, a few finished model homes, and a blank spot at the southeast corner where the grass never grew. I learned fast not to shine my light there. My name's Matt. I was 32 the summer I started working out there. Divorced, small apartment over a tire shop, no kids, not a lot of things that kept me from volunteering for graveyard shifts. My sister Danny told me the first night to bring a snack and a battery radio. For what? I asked. So you don't listen to your thoughts. She was half joking, half serious. She's always had that radar for things you can't measure. I told her I'd be fine. It was just land. Just a job. Bring a radio, she said anyway. The static will keep you company. On my second night, I met the neighbor. Her name was Mrs. Alvarez, short and solid, the kind of woman who makes you feel like you're about to be fed or scolded. Her house wasn't part of the new development. It sat sideways to the gravel road, older than everything else, with a wire fence and a porch light that never went out. She walked over with a paper cup of something that steamed and handed it to me like we'd agreed on it for years. You're the night man, she said, I guess. So, keep your lights away from that corner, she said, chin toward the blank patch. They don't like it. Who? She looked at me like I was simple. The ones who were here first. I wanted to laugh, but she was so calm I just nodded and set the cup on the hood of my truck. What is this? Café con canela, she said. It helps if you hear singing. Singing. She didn't answer, just patted the truck twice like a horse and went back to her yard. When she opened her front door, I heard a radio playing old Tejano songs and a man's voice talk, singing about a river. The site manager, a man named Reese who always smelled like sunblock and hurry, made a big deal of reminding me not to let urban legends spook me. He said the last guard left after one night, called him at 3 a.m, babbling about footsteps and wet prints. Reese laughed when he told me that part. It didn't even rain, he said. Guy probably spilled his coffee and freaked himself out. I kept my coffee in a screw-top thermos after that. My first week was uneventful. I parked near the model home, walked the perimeter every hour, swept my flashlight across the shallow trenches and stacks of lumber. Sometimes I thought I heard voices from the tree line, but it was always cars on the main road a mile away. The air smelled like cut pine and diesel and something earthy that clung to my boots. I called Danny once around midnight to kill time. We talked about her kid, my nephew, who was starting kindergarten and already correcting her Spanish in a 5-year-old's overconfident way. Bring a radio, she said again before we hung up. I have one in the truck, I lied. The first weird thing that happened was small. I walked the southeast corner, Mrs. Alvarez's no-light zone, and found a line of little holes in the dirt. Not like animal prints, These were round, perfect circles, the size of quarters, in 2 rows like the buttons on a shirt, leading from the blank patch to the gravel road. I crouched and touched the edge of one. The dirt was damp even though the air was dry and the last rain was 3 days ago. When I stood up, my radio chirped. I don't mean the radio I didn't bring. I mean the handheld the site manager left in the model home. I was sure I'd turned it off. It chirped anyway, loud in the empty night. And then there was a voice like someone too far away to hear clearly, saying something that could have been my name if my name was made of wind. I went inside the model home and found the radio blinking red, battery low. I turned it off and took it out to the truck because I didn't want noise coming from the empty house, not when the floorboards creaked for no reason. I told myself I was being practical. The second weird thing happened 3 nights later. A sinkhole. It was small, only a foot across, but it wasn't there at 10 and it was there at 1. The ground around it sloped like something heavy had pressed up from below and then decided not to bother. I marked it with caution tape from my kit and called Reese. He was half asleep and irritated. "Fill it in," he said. "I'm not a backhoe. Kick some dirt over it. We'll fix it in the morning." I didn't fill it. I don't know why. I think I was afraid that if I covered it, I'd hear something from under the dirt. I walked rings around it until 2 in the morning, like that would help, and then sat in my truck and tried to nap. When I woke up, there were footprints on my windshield. Small, bare. They started at the bottom edge of the glass and went up and over the cab, disappearing into nothing. I sat there holding my breath while the engine ticked with heat. When I finally got out, I touched one. It was cold, and the dust stuck to my finger the way it sticks to wet skin. I told myself someone had pranked me. The only someone close enough to do it without me hearing was Mrs. Alvarez, which made less than 0 sense. I wiped the prints away with the hem of my shirt and walked to her fence anyway. She was already on the porch, watching me, her arms folded tight. "You heard them?" she said. I didn't hear anything. She shook her head. "You don't listen yet." Mrs. Alvarez, "Julia," she said. "Julia, what is that corner?" "Really?" She looked past me to the blank patch like she was reading something written in air. "My grandfather said men came with wagons a long time ago at night, when it was too hot to be alive. They were not allowed to bury their dead in the city cemetery. So they brought them here. No markers, no names. They split families so no one could cry in the same place." She leaned forward, eyes dark. "That corner is not empty. It is crowded." I thought about the little round holes, the sinkhole, the radio, the prints. I thought about how I had laughed at Danny about a radio like that meant anything. "Don't shine your light there at night," Julia said. "Don't talk like you own it. And if you hear singing, you hum along like you don't know the words." I nodded and went back to my truck and did not sleep again. The next day, Reese huffed around the site and made notes and complained about moisture issues like moisture was a personal insult. He stood at the sinkhole with his hands on his hips and said, "Fill it." He ordered a laborer named Tom to bring a load of dirt. Tom, a lean man with a ball cap that had seen better days, looked at the hole and shook his head. "Boss," he said, "that's not going to hold." "It'll hold until inspection," Reese said, and walked away. Tom waited until he was gone and then crouched by the hole. "You hear it?" he asked me. "What?" He tilted his head. We were both quiet. I was about to say no when I realized I did hear something. Not singing, not even a voice. Like a breath being pulled through teeth, steady and low, the sound a house makes when it settles, but under the ground. I swallowed and tasted something like metal. "It's an old place," Tom said. "My dad used to bow his head when we drove by. My mom would make the sign of the cross and he'd swat her hand like, 'Don't you do that, old lady,' voodoo in my truck, but he'd slow down anyway. People forget what's under us. They build and think the dirt is a floor. What is it, though?" I asked because it was either talk or run. Tom stood up. "It's a reminder," he said, and then he shoveled dirt into the hole until it looked like nothing had ever been there. That night, the chanting started. I don't know what else to call it. It wasn't any language I recognized, and I've worked enough kitchens and warehouses to learn more than a few. It came from the southeast corner, soft at first, like someone talking in another room with the door closed. I sat in my truck with the window cracked and told myself it was wind and crickets and maybe a radio from Julia's porch. Then it got louder. Not loud like volume, loud like a weight. I felt it in my chest the way you feel bass. It rose and fell in a pattern that made my hair stand up. My mouth went dry and I took a long drink from the thermos without tasting anything. I turned the key and the truck didn't start. The lights were fine. The battery was fine. The engine just gave me a tired cough like an old man and stopped. I tried again and something rattled under the hood like a wrench left where it shouldn't be, and then everything went quiet. The chanting kept on, patient like it had all the time in the world. I grabbed the handheld radio and pressed the call button. "Reese," I said, "pick up." The radio crackled and a voice answered, but it wasn't Reese. It was soft and layered, like two people speaking at once into a well. I didn't understand a word. It wasn't Spanish, it wasn't English. It wasn't any language I've ever heard outside of church dreams. The hair on my arms prickled. I put the radio down like it was hot and got out of the truck. The chanting stopped. The night went back to bugs and faraway tires and a dog barking 2 streets over. I stood there like an idiot, key in one hand, radio in the other, feeling the sweat tick down the middle of my back. I told myself I would walk to Julia's fence, ask her to call a tow, ask her to call anybody, and then I saw the footprints. They were small, bare, wet-looking in a way that doesn't make sense if you haven't seen it, like the water is part of the print, not on top of it. They started at the corner of the blank patch and led in a straight line toward me, stopping at the toes of my boots. There were 2 sets side by side like 2 people had walked out of the earth and up to my truck. I followed the line back with my light. The first few prints had sharp edges like whoever made them had just stepped up. After that, they softened, like they were drying. They stopped at my feet and then they didn't go anywhere. No heel turn, no smudge where someone had pivoted. Just stop. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. If I had been the praying kind, I would have done it then. Instead, I said, "Okay," out loud as politely as I could, and backed up very slowly until my calves hit the truck's bumper. I got in and tried the ignition again. It turned like nothing had ever been wrong. I drove to Julia's and parked half up on her grass. She came out like she'd been listening at the door. No surprise in her face. Just a tired sadness that made me feel like a kid who's about to hear "I told you so." "You heard them," she said. "I saw prints," I said. 2 sets, small, they just stopped. She nodded. "Children," she said softly, like it tasted familiar. She set a small, old-fashioned bell on my dashboard. "If you hear them again, ring it 3 times, slowly. It is not magic. It is manners." "What does that even—" "It tells them you see them," she said. And then she put her hand on my cheek, the way my mother used to do when I came home too late. "Don't go to that corner again." I tried not to. I really did. But everything bad out there was drawn to it the way water is drawn to the low spot. Pipes burst on that side first. The model home's front door swelled and stuck only when it faced that way. A pallet of bricks slid without anyone touching it and came to rest neatly like a wall that had decided not to stand. When the wind blew, the weeds there moved against it. During the 4th week, Reese announced I'd have company on my shift. "We got copper taken from the far end," he lied. I could tell he was lying because he wouldn't meet my eyes and because his sunblock smell was stronger, like he'd rushed through it. I hired a second guard to patrol the perimeter and make you feel less lonely. The second guard was a big guy named Curtis with forearms like fence posts and a laugh that came out of his nose. He took one look at the blank patch and said, "Nope. I'll take the north side," I offered. "We'll switch every hour," he said, like a man making a good compromise with a ghost. We lasted an hour and a half. At a little after 1, Curtis went to check the portable toilets by the south fence and didn't come back. 15 minutes passed, then 20. I called on the radio, got nothing but static. I cussed, grabbed my light, and went to find him. He was standing by the toilets, jaw slack, breathing fast through his nose like he'd run hard and stopped too quick. His light lay in the grass, shining at his shoes. I picked it up and swung the beam where he was staring. The sinkhole was back. Bigger this time, 2 feet across. And this time there was no slow slope around it, no suggestion. The circle cut clean like a cookie from dough. The dirt at the rim was damp, The air above it was colder than the rest of the night by a degree you could measure with your skin. "Did you see?" I started. "Listen," he said. We did. Something moved deep below us, not directly under the hole, but in the direction of the blank patch, a shuffling, not animal, not roots, not water. Dry sound, fabric on wood. It took me a long time to understand what I was hearing. "Curtis," I whispered. "Back up." He didn't. He leaned forward just slightly, like a man leaning into a mirror. "Someone's down there," he said. No. His foot slid. Dirt went into the hole. The sound changed. It became a stutter, a gasp, the hungry inhale of a pressure drop, the kind you feel in your ears before a storm. Curtis grabbed my forearm hard enough to bruise. "Pull," he said, though he wasn't being pulled. He just needed the word. I stepped back and took him with me. The ground by the hole crumbled. A chunk the size of a dinner plate fell away, then another. Something flashed pale down there and then disappeared. Curtis hissed like he'd touched a burner. We kept stepping back until the earth stopped moving. The chanting began somewhere to our left, distant and steady. Not angry, not kind. Less like a song and more like instructions repeated until the hands know what to do without the head. The wind came up out of nowhere and ran in place, rustling plastic wrap and paper plans and making the half-built walls whisper. I realized I was holding Julia's bell in my fist. I don't remember taking it from the truck. I rang it once. Twice. 3 times. Slowly. It sounded thin and ridiculous in the open air. The chanting stopped like someone cut a rope. Curtis and I stood there with the wind pushing at our shirts. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and laughed his nose laugh, except now it sounded like a man trying not to cry. "I'm not coming back," he said. "You're on shift until I'm not coming back," he said again, and I believed him. The next day, Reese acted like we were children who'd stayed up too late telling ghost stories. He said the portable toilet had shifted because of subsoil differential. He said the hole was decompaction. He said Curtis's resignation was a personnel issue. He didn't say what I saw in his eyes, which was fear shaped like anger. He told me if I couldn't handle it, he'd find someone who could. I could have quit. I probably should have. But something about the place had its hook in me, not the shine of it, the opposite. The stubborn, quiet way it refused to be turned into a brochure. I told myself it was a working man thing, solidarity with ground that didn't want to be bossed. Danny said I was being an idiot and also asked if I was sleeping. I told her yes. I lied. When I did sleep, I dreamed of small hands patting the sheet near my knees like a child checking a bed for monsters. 2 nights later, the water line burst under the model home. I heard it like a sigh, then a cough, then a flat bang. Water poured up through the crawlspace vents, muddy and strong, as if the earth was tired of drinking and decided to spit. I ran to the main and shut it off, then stood in the dark, listening to water still moving where it shouldn't. The model home smelled like wet plaster and sweet rot. My boots left prints in the silt on the floor. I should have called Reese. Instead, I went to the blank patch. I don't know why. I think I wanted to see if the ground there was dry, like that would mean something. The weeds there were wet, as if rain had fallen just in that square. My light bounced off something pale low to the dirt. I crouched. It was a button. Old, bone or shell, with 2 holes. The kind you'd find in a jar in your grandmother's sewing box. It wasn't buried. It was set on the surface as neatly as if someone had placed it there for me. I picked it up without thinking. It was warmer than the air. I almost dropped it. Behind me, someone whispered. It wasn't words. It was breath near my ear. The kind of sound you make to get someone's attention in a church. I stood up fast enough to mess up my knee and spun around with the light. The beam cut lines across the weeds and hit nothing but stems and my own breath. I said, "Okay," again, because manners are habits. I set the button down where I found it and backed away. The next morning, the model home's floor was covered in prints. Not small this time. Adult. Bare. From the front door to the kitchen to the hallway where the staged family photos hung, and back to the vanity in the master bathroom. They stopped there, right in front of the mirror. a smudge in the dust like a hand had touched the glass. The plumber whistled when he saw them and said, "Man, y'all throw good parties," and then got out his wrenches and wouldn't look at me again. I rang the bell that night just to hear it. Nothing answered. I sat on the tailgate and watched Julia water her front garden like any night. She waved without looking up. When I finally went home, dawn was a thin bruise on the horizon. I lasted another week. I wouldn't have, but the money kept its own kind of chanting in my head. Rent, tires, groceries, you don't have a cushion. During that week, the chanting at the corner came every night. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. I learned that if I hummed, it changed. Not louder or quieter, just different, like a conversation. I started to think about them. Not as ghosts exactly. As neighbors I didn't know how to greet. I brought a second thermos and poured a little into the dirt when I did my rounds. It felt stupid and right at the same time. On my last night, Danny drove out to bring me tacos and to see if I was telling the truth. She's small and tough and speaks to the world like it owes her change. She parked next to my truck with her hazard lights blinking like we were on the shoulder of a freeway, and handed me foil-wrapped food and a look that said, "Don't argue. I'm staying for an hour," she said. "I want to hear it." I told her I didn't know if they'd come. I told her it didn't work like a show. She rolled her eyes at me and ate half a taco in 3 bites. Julia came over with a lantern and a paper bag. She looked at Danny and then at me and nodded like, "Okay, family." She set the lantern on my tailgate and opened the bag. Inside were 4 candles and a small wooden box with a sliding lid. She took out something white and flat and put it on my palm. A button, twin to the one I'd found. "They leave them sometimes," she said, "when they want you to understand. They are not angry because you are here. They are angry because they were not seen when they were here. That is different." "What am I supposed to do?" I asked, meaning tonight and also meaning everything. "You light," she said, and handed Danny the candles. We stood at the edge of the blank patch, not on it, because even in our newfound courage we were not stupid. Danny stuck the candles in the dirt and lit them. The flames leaned north, then east, then straight up. The night around us felt big and full. I don't know how else to say it. Not like something approaching, but like something that had always been there waiting for us to be quiet enough to notice. I rang the bell 3 times. The chanting rose up clear and soft. Not sorrowful. Not peaceful either. Work song, hands in rhythm. The hair on my arms and neck lifted and stayed up. Danny's face went still. Julia closed her eyes. I didn't understand the words, but my body did. My shoulders wanted to move. My breath fell into step with it without asking me. I thought suddenly and with a certainty that didn't belong to me, about a field lit by a bad moon and men digging in heat, and a woman singing to mark each drop of the shovel. The ground shifted. Not a sinkhole, not a crack. A long, slow settling like a person exhaling after holding their breath a very long time. The candles trembled but didn't go out. The chanting kept time. I realized I was crying. Not big tears, but steady. The kind you don't wipe because it would feel rude. Something white rose up through the dirt between the candles. Danny grabbed my hand and squeezed hard enough to hurt. The white wasn't bones. It was cloth. A strip. The edge of a sleeve pushing up and then laying back like a wave. It left a clean line in the soil, the way a sheet leaves a line on a bed. The chanting deepened, and for one shattering second I understood a word. Not with my ears. With my chest. A name, not mine. Someone's. Someone whose button I had picked up and put back because I finally understood that not everything found is for me. Danny whispered, "You hear that?" And I nodded. The candles went out. Not with a puff. With a sigh. The night folded back around us. The lot went back to bugs and wind shift and a far dog. I rang the bell once without meaning to, and the sound made my skin crawl because it felt like interrupting a prayer. Danny said very softly, "We should go." Julia put her hand on my shoulder. "You should go," she said. "And not just tonight." I quit the next morning. Reese didn't argue. He looked relieved. He said something about seasonal staffing adjustments in a voice that tried to be professional and landed on grateful. Curtis was already gone. Tom had transferred to another site. They filled the sinkhole again and poured a slab over the blank patch 2 weeks later. They built a house there. They sold it to a couple from Houston who wanted country quiet. I moved apartments. I told myself it was cheaper. It was, but that wasn't why. The night after the slab went down, I woke up to wet footprints on my bedroom floor. Small, bare. They started at the baseboard by the window and walked to the side of my bed and stopped. I sat up fast enough to make myself dizzy and reached for the lamp. In that second before the light, I smelled soil. Not dirt, soil, old and deep. I turned on the lamp and the prints were gone. I called Julia the next day and told her. She said, "They know your name now." "That is not a curse, Matthew. That is a responsibility." "What am I supposed to do?" I asked again because it was the only question I had that wasn't a cry. "You remember," she said. "When people laugh, you say the names of the streets that were here before the cul-de-sacs. When you pass by and see the house, you touch your hat. When you hear singing, you hum. I do. Not because I think it keeps them away, but because it feels like the only honest thing. When I drive past the development now, the model home is a real home with a swing and a plastic slide. There's a blue wreath on the door. The southeast corner house has gray shutters and a lawn that never looks right. A little too yellow, a little too tired. Sometimes I see the woman who lives there watering a strip that never takes. She waves. I wave back. We are neighbors after all. Once, on a hot August night, I drove out there with a six-pack and parked across from Julia's. She came out with Café con Canela, and we sat on the hood of my new truck, which does not have footprints on it, and listened. No chanting, just wind. Just an old ground remembering itself. When I left, I rang the bell from the glove box once without thinking. I don't know if anyone heard it but me. I don't tell this story to scare you. I don't even tell it to warn you. I tell it because some places deserve to be spoken of in low voices. Because not everything that makes you afraid wants to hurt you. Some things just want you to know they are there. The land remembers even when the paperwork doesn't. The earth under our city is crowded with names no one writes on mailboxes. If you go out to Black Hope, and I don't recommend you do, and the ground hums in your bones and the night feels full and the air smells like metal, you ring the bell 3 times. You hum if you don't know the words. And when the footprints stop at your feet, you say, "Okay," softly, like you're accepting a cup from a neighbor. You go home. You sleep if you can. In the morning, you try to do right by the living. You try to do right by the dead. Sometimes you wake to prints that aren't there when you turn on the light. Sometimes you dream of a field under a bad moon and a song that keeps the hand steady. Sometimes, when it's very late and the house is very quiet, you hear a child's wet feet pat across the floor to your bed, and you keep your eyes closed and you say goodnight to the names you don't know. That's not a curse. That's memory walking. I didn't grow up in Paris, Texas. My cousin Leah did. She's the kind of person who knows everyone's dog's name and which gas station has the better breakfast burritos. I drove out to visit her last October to get a break from work and from Houston in general. When you spend all week in an office with tinted windows and artificial air, you start wanting places with actual wind and grass and a sky that looks like it was painted instead of projected. On my first afternoon there, we did the usual small town, lap feed store, coffee stand, a used bookshop that smelled like damp paper and cedar. As the sun slid down and the courthouse lights blinked on, Leah pointed out a rusted iron fence up on a hill and said, "That's Evergreen. You've heard about the statue, right?" I hadn't, but I didn't admit that right away. She kept driving, cheeks lit red from the stoplight, grinning at the way my eyebrows went up. "The Jesus with the red eyes," she said. "Kids dare each other to go at night. Half of them chicken out at the gate. The other half come back different." "What does different mean?" I asked. Leah shrugged like it wasn't her job to define it. Quieter. That evening, after burgers at a place with deer heads on the wall, her boyfriend Caleb met us at her apartment. Caleb's the type who laughs during scary movies and calls the jump scares before they happen. He's got that stubborn confidence that looks like a jacket he never takes off. When Leah told him we were going to Evergreen, he smirked and grabbed his truck keys. "Field trip," he said, and tossed me a flashlight from his glove compartment that felt like it weighed more than a hammer. We drove out of town with the windows down. Somewhere a radio was playing a preacher's voice, patchy under static. The air smelled like cut hay and dust. It was one of those brittle fall nights where the temperature drops and the sound seems to travel farther than it should. I could hear dogs barking blocks away and the distant 2-note moan of a train. Evergreen sits behind a chain that looks decorative during the day and like a warning after dark. We parked along the shoulder and climbed the shallow ditch. There's a sag in the fence where people go over, and somebody had tied a length of blue ribbon there, frayed to threads that shivered even though the wind was dead. The three of us swung our legs over and dropped inside like we'd just agreed to something. If you asked me to draw a cemetery from memory, I'd draw evergreen. Skinny cedars, crooked stones, names carved in fonts nobody uses anymore. Angels with the faces worn flat. Plastic flowers gone chalky. It wasn't big, just crowded. The graves laid out with the logic of a town that had grown too fast and then stopped. Our flashlights caught the glass reflectors set into some of the markers, little red marbles that bounced our beams back at us like eyes. "See?" Caleb said, kicking at a walnut hull. "It's the reflectors. You get enough light and voila." Urban legend. Leah didn't answer. She was walking ahead past a line of short headstones like teeth toward the far corner where the family plots had iron fences and stone posts with round caps big as bread loaves. That's where the statue was. You could tell from the small pink candles hardened into puddles at the base and the way the grass had been pressed flat by feet. He was taller than I expected, maybe 7 feet on his plinth, with his hands open and slightly out, palms tilted toward us as if we'd arrived late and he hadn't given up waiting. The marble had that pale glow that almost looks like heat when it's really just smoothness, and the face was soft and calm in the way carved faces are, more suggestion than detail. His eyes were just stone, no glass, no lights. Simple sockets carved to suggest gaze. I stood there long enough to feel the quiet go from calming to a little too thick. You know that moment when silence is a room you've walked into and the door closes behind you? It was that. I took out my phone like it was a talisman and switched the camera to night mode. "Don't," Leah said low. "You're the one who brought us." Caleb laughed. He stepped inside the little iron fence around the statue without even pausing. The gate was wired shut with coat hanger, but the fence itself had a missing segment where someone's truck had probably nudged it years back. Caleb went through the gap with his normal, unembarrassed stride and tapped the base of the statue with his knuckles. "Solid. Nice stone. Someone spent money." "You're not supposed to touch it," Leah said. "Who says?" Caleb put his palm flat against the marble like he was feeling for a pulse. I was framing a shot when I noticed the shadows went wrong. It's hard to explain without sounding like I'm trying to sell you on a campfire story, but the angles weren't right. My beam cut across the grass, and the shadow of the fence bars fell left when the flashlight was right. The cedar's shadows seemed to lean, like a row of people looking the same direction. And then there was a fourth shadow beside ours that didn't have a body to cast it. It crouched in the gap where the fence was broken, low and tight like a person hiding behind their own knees. "Caleb," I said. "What? You see it?" He turned, grinning like he expected a raccoon. "I thought I heard—" Leah's voice braided into mine. She was breathing shallow. "Evan, did you say my name?" "I didn't." "Leah," said a voice behind us, soft as a finger on a dust film. "Leah." We spun so fast our lights slashed the trees and the stones. Nothing. The sound had been so close I could have sworn it brushed the rim of my ear. I pointed my phone where I thought it came from and hit the shutter. The screen went white, then red like someone dragged sandpaper across the pixels. The image froze on a blur of static threaded with crimson, but not the flat crimson of a filter. It had grain, like it was being backlit by a small source that pulsed. I stabbed at the screen. The UI wouldn't respond. Leah made a small animal sound I didn't know she could make, and then she said, "Caleb, stop touching it." He had both hands on the statue now, like he was bracing himself during a storm. "It's warm," he said, laughing like he knew it was a ridiculous thing to claim. "No, I'm serious, it's not cold. Feel it." "Get out," Leah said. I'd known her all my life. I'd seen her mad, scared, tired. I'd never heard that voice from her, flat and sharp like metal. Caleb pulled his hands back and took 2 steps away, performing politeness like an apology you make to a stranger's grandma. "There, happy?" A train blew its horn again, way off, wrong direction. The noise came from the south, but I felt it in my chest from the east. My flashlight flickered and steadied. Everything smelled like hot pennies and wet limestone. We weren't alone. A wedge of kids came around the cedar line. 5 or 6 of them, high school age by the way they tried to stand like they didn't care. Their light was a single lantern app on a phone held up by a tall boy with a shaved head, and a Texas Rangers hoodie. He saw us and raised 2 fingers in a peace sign. "You here for the eyes?" Caleb, who never met a crowd he didn't want to lead, said, "We're just leaving." The tall kid ignored that. He nodded toward the statue and then sideways toward his friend, a girl with chipped black nail polish and a backpack that clicked with charms. "You don't point a light in his face," she said. "It makes him mad." "Who told you that?" I asked, because I wanted somebody to say a name I could look up later. A source, a story. The girl lifted her shoulders. "It's just what people say." The tall kid dipped his light low. "You don't look him in the eye either. That's if you don't want him to know you." "What happens if he knows you?" Leah asked, quieter than before. The kid's jaw worked. He didn't answer. He raised the phone lamp to waist height, careful to keep it pointed at the ground, and he and his friends started walking toward us like we were mile markers on a road they took every night. As they got close, I realized something was wrong with the sound of their steps. I could hear each foot scuff the gravel, the soft crunch of grass. But there was also another set of steps, lighter, nearby and perfectly synced to mine. When I stopped, it stopped. When I shifted left, it shifted left. It was like an echo that had learned to keep up. "Do you hear that?" I asked. "What?" Caleb said. It should have irritated me, the way he never let himself admit he was spooked. Instead, it felt like a handhold. If he wasn't scared, maybe the night would bend around his disbelief and go soft. The tall kid put a finger to his lips. Behind us, someone laughed. It was a short laugh like a cough, the kind you make when you're embarrassed. The 6 of us turned at once, a carousel of beams. The laugh didn't repeat. And then, up on the plinth, the carved eyes started to glow. It wasn't like a flip of a switch. It was the barest hint of a red fleck at first, the way a brake light looks through fog. Then the flecks deepened. 2 dark cherries where stone should have been, and the color thickened the way a bruise blooms. The light wasn't bright exactly. It didn't spill. It just burned behind the sockets, and in that light the calm on the statue's face went from sacred to interested. I told myself there was probably a radio tower behind us I hadn't noticed.
I told myself there were reflectors or glass in the eyes or some weird lichen that caught certain wavelengths. I told myself anything I could while my scalp tightened and my tongue went dry.
Caleb said, "Okay, that's kind of cool," and stepped forward without thinking because that's who he is. The tall kid said no, and it came out like a yelp. But Caleb had already put his foot inside the fence gap. The red deepened. Maybe it shouldn't have been possible, but it looked like the gaze shifted not by turning, just by the feel of it, like standing in front of a motion sensor. My phone vibrated in my hand without a notification. The camera app unfroze on its own and the screen showed me a frame I didn't point at. The statue's face centered and steady, my own head a dark oval at the bottom edge. There was no way the angle made sense. I tilted the phone down to break the shot. The screen didn't move. The statue on the screen tilted its head the smallest degree, a nod that didn't happen in the physical world. The red points on the screen weren't exactly where the real red points were, like the image was feeding me the answer it preferred. "Leah," the soft voice breathed again, closer. "Leah." She grabbed my arm so tight her nails bit, and I was glad for the pain because it meant she was still here. "We have to go," she said. "Right now." "Hang on," Caleb said. He lifted his phone and snapped 3 pictures in defiant succession, the way you clap at a motion sensor light to make it come on. He glanced at the screen, then frowned harder than I'd ever seen him frown.
"He didn't show us right away."
He pinched to zoom, then pinched again, and the frown shook and turned into something like nausea. "What?" I asked. He swallowed. It put my name on the base." "That doesn't make any sense," I said, and reached for his phone. He resisted, then gave it up like he'd realized he shouldn't be the one holding it. The photo was grainy and dark, but the base of the statue was legible. Weather stains, wax drops, a patch of moss. And scratched into the grime layer with a fingernail or a key, I could read Caleb and under it a date in the format you use when you sign for a package. It was tonight's date. The tall kid made a rough sound like the beginnings of a cry he swallowed. The girl with black nails said, "We're done," and reached for his sleeve. Behind me, the whisper came again. My name this time, not Leah's. It said it with curiosity, like testing the weight of it in a mouth that belonged to the ground. I looked up at the face without meaning to. The red burned so steadily it might as well have been still, but I felt the focus change the way you feel someone in a room turn their attention. It landed on me. It recognized me. That's the only language my brain gave me, and it felt as true as anything I could touch. "Don't look," Leah said, but I already had. Something elastic in the air stretched and went tight. The fourth shadow at the fence lifted itself onto two knot legs and elongated into the shape of a person who didn't quite know how to be one. It didn't have edges, just density where there shouldn't be any. Caleb made a sound I'm embarrassed to put in writing. A strangled exclamation that ended on a laugh like he couldn't help himself. He moved backward without turning, eyes on the red, hands out as if to keep himself from touching anything. His heels bumped a flat stone and he stumbled. I grabbed for him and got only his jacket sleeve. The statue's right hand, the carved palm open in blessing, wasn't open anymore. I know how that sounds. I know marble doesn't change shape like a muscle flexing. But the shadow of the hand had moved on the ground, and where it had been open a second ago, it was now slightly curled. The first two stone fingers bent the tiniest fraction, as if closing over an invisible rope between us. The red in the eyes pulsed once. Not brighter, closer. "We're done," the girl repeated, and then she was actually running. The tall kid hesitated, torn between bravado and survival, and chose survival. His light swung and went small. The rest followed in a tangle of elbows and whispers. "Out," Leah said, dragging me. "Evan, please." We went for the gap in the fence and it felt smaller than before, like the metal had swelled. My flashlight died, then came back, a yo-yo of light. Caleb came last and he wouldn't put his back to the statue, so he crab-walked sideways until his shoulder caught the iron and the wire snagged his jacket. He cursed and shoved, ripped free with a squeal of fabric, and we were moving across the grass so fast I stepped on a grave and said sorry out loud to a name I don't remember. At the edge, I heard a car roll to a stop and a door pop. A voice called, "Y'all need to leave." Authoritative but not mad. A flashlight beam swept the path without going high. A police cruiser idled at the ditch, red and blue lights spinning without the siren. The officer didn't ask our names. He didn't write anything down. He just flicked his eyes at the fence and said, "Don't look back, okay? Just don't." We didn't. Not until we were buckled and the truck was moving. Caleb started to laugh again, then stopped and pressed his mouth flat like he'd crushed the laugh between his teeth. He drove too fast, hands tight on the wheel, and nobody said anything until we were under the buzzing fluorescence of a Whataburger. Gulping sodas like that would fix our throats. We sat there with our phones on the table like dead birds. I tried to open the photos I'd taken. The gallery showed thumbnails all red-hazed. When I tapped them, the app shut itself like it was embarrassed. Caleb got one image to open. It was the one with his name on the base. He pushed the phone toward me with only 2 fingers as if it would bite, and I leaned in. The date had changed. It wasn't tonight anymore. It was a date a week ahead. The timer you set for packages you know will arrive. Leah pushed the phone away like she couldn't help herself. "Stop," she said. "Just stop." I slept on Leah's couch with the TV on low. Around 3, my phone buzzed awake and the lock screen lit the dark room with a bloom of white. No notification. Just the screen waking up on its own and the camera app opening without my input to show me my own face in the front camera. Not the room, not the blue couch, not the TV flicker. Just me, like someone else had lifted the phone above me and wanted to make sure they had the angle right. A faint red glow rose in each of my pupils in the screen's reflection. Just a pinprick, just as if some distant brake light had found me. I turned the phone face down hard enough to make a thud, like I could push the image back into the glass. I thought that would be the end. That's not how this sort of story goes, but it's how I wanted it to go. I drove home the next day with the radio off and kept telling myself I'd been primed. We'd gone in expecting to be spooked. Our brains did the rest. By the time I got to my apartment, I had almost convinced myself. That night, something sat at the edge of my bed and shifted its weight, a human rhythm of springs and careful knees. I told myself it was one of those dreams where your body locks and your fear invents weight. I stared at the ceiling and told myself that even when I heard the soft, embarrassed laugh by my ear again, and felt breath that didn't smell like anything living. When I finally moved, snapping the paralysis like a dried twig, the room was empty. The window glass held 2 red dots for just a second longer than the streetlights could explain, then let them go. Caleb moved to Dallas a month later. He didn't say it was because of that night, but he stopped going out after dark and he started answering questions with "huh," as if they hadn't quite finished reaching him. Leah told me he doesn't sleep through anymore. He keeps waking up at 3:07, she said, which is the exact minute my phone wakes itself to show me my own face. I went back to Evergreen once, in daylight. I told myself I needed closure, which is a fancy word for a reason that doesn't admit you just want to poke the bruise. The chain across the entrance hung lazy, and the blue ribbon on the fence was gone. The statue looked the way it had before, hands open again, placid, no red. The base was clean. No name, no date. Someone had taken steel wool to the stone, or maybe there'd never been anything there at all. As I stood there, two things happened. My phone's compass spun a lazy circle even though my feet weren't moving, and a fly landed on the statue's cheek, walked across the carved eye, and hesitated like it had stepped into a zone that didn't feel like air. It lifted and drifted away, its buzz softer than it ought to be. A groundskeeper across the hill put his rake down and waved at me without looking at the statue. "Afternoon," he called. "Looks like rain." It didn't rain. The sky stayed hard blue. On my way out, I passed a woman on the sidewalk with a grocery bag. She glanced up at the hill, not at me, and then glanced away like she'd touched a hot burner and didn't want anyone to know. "Evening," she said, though it was noon. "I don't have a thesis to offer here. If you came looking for a takeaway, I can only give you this. Sometimes a town learns the shape of something and bends around it, the way roots grow around a stone. People don't talk about Evergreen because there's nothing to say that doesn't sound like a dare or an admission. If you go, you'll think you're just passing through a place where names are carved and years are counted. You'll think you're outside time observing. You're not. You're being observed. When you feel your name tested in a voice that can't belong to a person, you'll realize names are just handles, and you handed yours over when you looked up. If you ever find yourself at that fence and you see the red, don't try to take a picture. Don't touch the base. Don't look the gaze directly. Walk back the way you came. Keep your hands where you can see them. Keep your eyes on the ground and don't laugh even if your nerves tell you to. If you've already looked, I don't have good advice for you. My phone wakes itself at 3:07 every night and opens the camera to make sure my face is still the same shape. Sometimes the image tilts its head a fraction before I do. Sometimes, on the nights I'm brave enough to keep watching, I see a second shape just behind my shoulder. It's not a person. It's the idea of one, crouched and patient. A week after that night in Evergreen, I got a package notification with a date I recognized. No package arrived. The notification won't clear. Maybe that's the joke. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just a line of text that doesn't mean anything at all. But I can't shake the feeling that something's signed for me. And if I go back to Evergreen after dark, it won't be to look. It'll be because something there is already looking out and it knows me. And it's just waiting for me to stop pretending I don't know it back. I'm not from Galveston. I grew up outside Houston. The kind of place where the air always smelled a little like hot rubber from the freeway, and your shoes stuck to parking lots in August. But my cousin Elena moved to the island to study nursing, and for a while a few of us would drive down on weekends, crash on her sagging futon, and pretend we were tourists when we weren't broke college kids with sunburns. That November, the time change had just fallen back, and a fog rolled in off the Gulf thick enough to erase the far end of the street. We were 20-something and bored, so when Elena said the old city cemetery looked otherworldly in weather like this, Miguel, my best friend, forever chasing ghost stories like they're running away from him, said, "Then that's where we're going. If you're picturing a neat little fence and a sign that says quiet hours, forget it. Galveston's cemetery district is a patchwork stitched across 20-some acres, wrought iron beds and concrete vaults and angel statues leaning like people who've been standing too long. You step off the curb and into the 19th century, then the 20th, then back again. The dead are layered the way the city is layered. Storms, epidemics, a war that went too long and came back as memory. The ground itself feels uncertain, like it's remembering what used to lie on top of it." Elena brought a spare flashlight and a bag of gas station snacks. Miguel brought his camera because of course he did. I brought a sweater and a promise to myself that we'd be quick. I'd read about the hurricane of 1900 and the yellow fever outbreaks. I'd heard about the mass graves. I'm not superstitious, but I don't poke places that have earned their silence. It was just after 11 when we went through the gate. The fog softened everything to charcoal and pearl. The sea was invisible, but you could taste it. The lamps along Broadway became dull moons. The cemetery's smaller paths wound like old thoughts, curving around obelisks and crypts and sunken corners where the grass dipped. The names, German, Spanish, French, Irish, caught our lights and gave them back like secrets being repeated. We didn't talk much at first. There's a kind of respect you either feel or you don't. The fog held sound close. Even our footsteps sounded careful. Elena pointed out the Confederate section and a scattering of sea-weathered graves with anchors carved in their stones. Miguel shot photos that were mostly gray. "Put your light down," he whispered after a while, crouching. "There's that thing, they call them spirit photographs, right? Maybe the mist will pick something up if I don't blow it out." Elena rolled her eyes but humored him. I did too. We stood there, 3 dim shapes in the glow of our own breath while he took a couple of long exposures. Behind him, the silhouette of a Victorian angel watched with chipped nose and one broken hand lifted as if mid-sentence. "Okay," he said, standing. "Nothing. But it looks cool." "It looks wet," I said. "My socks are already ruined." We wandered deeper, past mausoleums with iron gates that rattled in the breeze, past a stone box covered in coins, and a marker I wish I hadn't read. A whole family lost in 1 week. I couldn't help counting the days between names. Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday. What must that house have sounded like by that last morning? We walked on, and the grass hissed with our ankles. The first odd thing didn't feel odd at all. It felt like music. Not the obvious kind, more like a thread of sound woven into the fog. I thought it was a radio at a nearby house or a car stopped on the street. But as we followed a path between 2 low walls, the thread thickened and separated into strands. A few voices, then more. Not words I could place, just the shape of words, like the way you know someone is praying without hearing the language. "Do you hear that?" Elena whispered. Miguel stopped, turning his head. "It's the wind." "There isn't any wind," she said. She was right. The fog moved like a sleeping animal. We listened. I would tell you exactly what I heard if I could. It wasn't English. It wasn't entirely anything. Sometimes I thought I caught a word like miserere, and other times it flattened into a hum with edges. It came from everywhere and nowhere like water in a pipe. If you tried to pin it to a direction, it slipped. "There's a church on Broadway," I said. "Maybe no bells," Elena said. "They ring the hour and it's not on the hour." She was looking at the ground, not the stones. She said later she didn't know why. Miguel took a photo in the direction of the sound and checked the display. "Black," he said after a beat. "I think my lens is fogging up." We kept moving. It's weird what you can talk yourself into. If you've ever woken up in the night and convinced yourself the figure at the end of your bed is just your jacket on the chair, you know the skill set. I pointed out names aloud as we passed them, Boudreaux, Martinez, Meyer, as if naming the present would fortify it. Elena told Miguel about a patient at the clinic who'd come in with a fishhook buried in his hand. Miguel told us about a photographer in the 1800s who faked seances. Normal things. Our breath made little clouds in front of our lights. We reached a line of above-ground family vaults that looked like a row of houses for dolls. The middle one had a door with a lock rusty enough to be theater. Somebody had left a bouquet of silk roses stuck in the hinge, and the fog had dotted them with water so they looked more real than they were. I wiped my flashlight beam across the names carved above the door. 2 were the same date. A storm date. I didn't want to think about the water finding them here. "Can we not do mausoleum peeking?" I asked, my voice too bright. "We'll look and go," Miguel said. He pressed the camera lens to the bars and clicked. "Promise." That's when something moved in the corner of my eye. I cut my light there, only a patch of mist thickening and sliding over the grass. Elena stiffened. "Did you?" she started, and then we all saw it. A small figure not more than a few yards away, standing half in the fog and half out. A child-sized shape, chalk pale at the edges, face a shade flatter than everything else. It was turned toward us in the way a photograph looks toward you. Not menacing. Not anything. Simply present, like the fact of a name. Elena's hand found my sleeve and squeezed. Miguel lowered his camera without taking the shot. "Hi," he said too loudly as if he could normalize the air by filling it with backbone. He lifted his free hand, palm out. "We're just walking." The shape didn't move. I told myself it was a statue in the fog, or the corner of a headstone catching light, or a person from the street who'd wandered in like us. But it had the wrong edges for a statue and the wrong posture for the bored or drunk. There's a way live people shift their weight even when they're still. This one didn't. "Let's go," Elena said. Let's go now, no one argued. We walked backward at first because turning our backs felt rude or stupid. The small figure dissolved into the air the way breath does when it's warm and then it's not. By the time we reached the end of the row and turned left, it was gone, if it had ever been there. The voices we had heard braided tighter until they were a murmur right beneath the skin of the fog. If someone asked me what they were saying, I'd say it was nothing and everything at once. Please, maybe. Or remember me. Or just the sound the past makes when you're close enough to press your ear to the door. We came out onto a wider path where an oak spread itself over a corner, its branches like the ribs of an umbrella. There a man stood with his hands in his jacket pockets. He was real in the ordinary way. He had a headlamp pushed up on his forehead and a reflective strip on his coat. His posture was the kind of tired that belongs to people who work alone at night. "You kids lost?" he asked, not unkindly. His voice had the soft shape of the island. "Just walking," Miguel said, relieved enough to sound friendly. "The fog's crazy. It'll do that," the man said. He glanced past us into the gray. "You don't want to be out here after midnight. You can be on the path and not on the path." "Meaning what?" Elena asked. "Meaning I get calls," he said. "People cry real hard on the phone, and by the time I get to where they say they are, they aren't. It's not a place to wander. This ground has had a lot asked of it." He stepped under the oak and fitted the headlamp down so he could see our faces better. In the glare, I noticed the hard lines around his mouth and a badge clipped to his pocket. "Ground staff or some kind of security, I guessed. You hear anything strange?" he asked, almost like a doctor going down the list. "Talking, singing?" "We heard something," I said carefully. "Prayers," Elena said before I could steer us back to normal. "We thought maybe a church." The man nodded. "Could be. Could be you heard a choir practice that ended 100 years ago. Could be memory sounds louder in soup like this. Either way, you shouldn't cut through the old sections tonight. The low plots collect water and the ones above, well," he hitched a shoulder. "You step wrong, you'll be ankle deep in a place you didn't mean to visit." We thanked him. He gave us the kind of smile people give kids who don't know what they're stepping on, and pointed us toward the main walk that would take us back to the gate. As we turned, he added, "If you see any kids running, don't follow." Then he flicked his lamp away as if he hadn't added anything at all. We headed where he'd pointed. The voices thinned as if they were wary of the open space. The main walk felt like a hallway with lights that didn't reach far. I told myself we'd be out in 5 minutes. Miguel walked faster. Elena stayed close enough that our arms bumped. About halfway along, a patch of ground went soft under my left foot. It gave with that particular suction that is not exactly mud and not exactly something else, and I stepped wide to avoid it. My sneaker came away with a wet sound and an unkind old smell rose, a sweet and sour that made my stomach lean toward my throat. "Keep to the middle," Elena said quietly. "Don't step near the edges." She was breathing shallowly now. "I want to go home." We picked up speed. The fog coiled and loosened around us like something living. The gate was ahead somewhere. If I had looked up sooner, maybe I would have seen the 3 figures lined along the right-hand side of the path. Not standing together like friends, but spaced as if waiting their turns. The first wore what might have been a uniform or just a coat with buttons that caught the light. The second was a woman with her arms wrapped around herself, hair pinned back in a style I've only seen in photographs. The third was small, barefoot. All of them faced us as if watching a slow parade. We did not stop. Miguel whispered, "Ignore it. It's fog on the stones. Keep walking." He sounded like he was talking to himself. As we passed, the small one took one step, not toward us, more like the path had shifted under their feet and they were trying to adjust. Their face was nothing and everything. The woman turned her head. The coat with the buttons stayed absolutely still, which somehow made him the worst. "Don't run," Elena said through her teeth. "If we run, we'll trip. I don't know if not running saved us or doomed us to a longer memory." We walked as if we had learned to walk yesterday. We kept our eyes on the gray in front of us instead of on the edges, where the shapes might be. The murmur threaded itself around our knees. My flashlight shook. I aimed it ahead and then down and then ahead again, as if the beam had grown rebellious and needed hurting. The gate wasn't where it had been. The path that should have straightened toward the road veered, and when we followed it, it dead-ended into a low, walled family plot with a tree taking up one corner. The names on the wall looked newly scrubbed despite their age. We had made a wrong turn in a place with only 2 directions. "I think we came left at the obelisk," Miguel said, his voice thin. "We should have gone right." There was no obelisk, Elena said. There was a broken angel in it. She stopped. It's fine. We just go back to the oak and start again. But when we turned, the oak was gone, or the fog had eaten it, or the path had curled and changed. The row of houses for the dead had become a scattering of low crypts with chained lids. My stomach felt like a fist. The voices weren't louder, but they were closer, as if they had stepped into the same room. Hello? I called before I thought about it. My voice stuck to the air and slipped sideways. Sir? The man with the headlamp? The fog gave me back a version of my voice that didn't like me. Elena pressed her fingers to her lips as if to fold the sound back in. We stood with that bad stillness that happens when you're trying to decide whether to scream. Then, from an angle that couldn't exist in a normal place, a small shape ran across the path. It was fast in the way children are fast. It didn't look at us because it didn't need to. It flashed through the edge of my light, a wet knee, a white calf, hair stuck flat. It cut between two stones and vanished into the gray. We all flinched the way you flinch when a bird flies too close to your face. Don't follow, Elena said immediately, like a reflex, echoing the man. We don't follow. Something tugged at my sweater. That's what it felt like, 2 fingers. Not a grab. A pull of attention, not a fabric. I spun with my light and caught nothing but the thick of the air and the outlines of things that had been standing a long time. My brain tried to take inventory because that's what brains do when they can't solve the problem. My mother's face at the kitchen table, my car parked down the street with a parking ticket snowed under the wiper, an appointment next Thursday at a dentist I didn't like, what I said to a girl in high school that I still regretted. All of it lit up at once in a stupid fireworks show called I Was Alive. I think I started to talk, rattling pointless things about how the fog makes distances weird, but Miguel said, "Stop. Do you hear it?" It took me a second. Under the murmur, under the sound of my own heart, there was a fainter sound. Not made by a throat. A scraping like a shovel meeting rock far away. One strike, another, then a pause too long to be human patience. And between strikes, the softest clink like coins being placed one by one. We go toward the road, Elena said. Forget the paths. The road is that way. She pointed not anywhere I would have chosen. Walk straight. We climbed a low wall we had definitely not climbed on the way in and stepped carefully across a sunken rectangle where the grass had settled. My foot slid on a damp stone. The murmur rose into something nearly words and then fell again. The scrape hit rock and stopped. My mouth tasted like pennies and salt. We threaded between vaults and over a strip where broken shells had been thrown down and then forgotten. The fog thinned and thickened unpredictably, and sometimes we saw more than we wanted to. A statue's face blurred so it looked like it had been rubbed. A hand-carved lamb that had absorbed the night into its eyes. A row of names all the same because sometimes entire families don't move out of the path of history fast enough. At the corner of one plot, a little pile of pebbles and seashells had been arranged by someone with steady hands. The coins clinked again, but not from there, from everywhere else. And then we were back at the oak. I knew it by the way the branches made a dark web overhead. Relief hit me so hard my knees went damp. The man with the headlamp wasn't there. The voices were quieter here, or else they were pretending to be. We hurried down the main walk, and this time it stayed straight like a promise. The gate appeared like a mouth opening. Outside, the street was empty and very clean like after a storm. The fog was less sure of itself this far from the graves. I wanted to run but didn't until we were across the street and on the sidewalk that belonged to cars and corner stores and humans who checked their phones for the time. We didn't talk for a block. When we did, it was only to confirm the obvious. "We're out," Miguel said. "We're out," Elena repeated, as if it were a spell that required repetition. We reached Elena's apartment, 3 rooms that smelled like lemon cleaner and coffee. None of us wanted to turn off the lights. We made tea we didn't drink and put on a show none of us watched. At around 2, when the fog outside the window fell back a little, we started to breathe like we'd been holding it underwater. Elena fell asleep sitting up with a blanket on her knees. Miguel scrolled through his camera without hope. "Nothing," he said after a while, not surprised. "Just mist. The photos look like smoke." "Good," I said, though I didn't feel good. If he had caught any faces in that soup, I didn't want to know which ones. He didn't give up easily. He swiped through the pictures from earlier, the ones with the angel statue and the vault and the tree, then stopped at a shot he hadn't meant to take, a blur where the camera had fired while he was lowering it. "Huh," he said, leaning in. "Huh." Don't, I said. Please don't say, huh? It's probably nothing, he said, but his voice did the thing voices do when they're building a structure to live under. He turned the screen so I could see. It was nothing, and then it wasn't. Just a smear of gray and a brighter gray that could have been a reflection, and in the bright smear, the suggestion of a row of small shapes. Not faces. Not even heads. Just the geometry of presence where there shouldn't be any. The kind of thing you can't show anyone without sounding like a bored liar, which is the best kind of horror because it leaves you with no audience but yourself. We slept badly. In the morning, the sun was a pale stripe and the fog had gone home to the sea. We agreed not to go back after dark. We agreed to tell each other it was the weather and some subconscious suggestion, and the way cities store echoes. I drove back to Houston before lunch. The freeway noise was a comfort in the way a vacuum cleaner is a comfort to a baby. It obliterates subtler thoughts. I didn't think about the cemetery again until the following week, when I put on a coat I hadn't worn since that night. When I put my hand in the pocket, my fingers closed around something round and cold. For a second I thought it was gum and foil, or a key I'd forgotten about. I pulled it out. It was a coin I hadn't seen before. Not old enough to be exotic, not new enough to be interesting. It had a worn edge and a nick like a bite mark. On one side I could make out the faint outline of a wreath. On the other, a head worn flat until there was only the suggestion of a profile. It wasn't American. I don't think it was from anywhere I could name. It had weight. I stared at it in the light above my kitchen sink and told myself it had fallen into my pocket from my car, or from Elena's couch cushions, or the street. I told myself there are a million ways for small things to travel. I put it on the counter and went about my day. That night, when I turned off the TV and the house settled, I heard two sounds at once in the quiet. The first was my upstairs neighbor running the tap. The second was a bear scraping, somewhere too far away to be in my apartment and too close to belong to the rest of the city. One strike, then another. Between them, a soft clink like metal touching stone. I stood very still and listened until it stopped. It didn't happen again that night or the next, only sometimes, irregular as a heart that used to be strong. I took the coin to a friend who works at a pawn shop. He turned it in his fingers, held it under a loop, and shrugged. Some commemorative thing? Oldish, not valuable, he said. You want me to take it off your hands for $1? I told him I'd keep it. He laughed and said, "Suit yourself, because that is what people say when you want something useless." I walked home with it in the pocket of my coat. When I reached my door, for no reason that made sense, I put the coin on the doormat instead, under the corner. It felt either like an offering or a boundary. I told myself that was silly. I told myself a lot of things. Some nights I dream I'm back in the fog. The path goes straight and then slides. The voices are not words, and then they are. Please sounds like water falling into water. Remember sounds like the part of a name you can't pronounce. When I wake up, my mouth tastes like salt, and on the other side of my door, on the other side of the thin wood between me and the world, I sometimes hear a very small sound, like someone laying a coin down gently so it doesn't make a fuss. I haven't told Elena because she'd worry. I haven't told Miguel because he'd go back with a bigger camera. I know what the sensible thing would be, to go to the cemetery in daylight, find a sunny corner, and put the coin somewhere it belongs. I also know the truth. The coin already belongs wherever the sound follows it. Sometimes I think it's asking to go home. Other times I think it's a receipt. Last week, waiting for a bus, I stood beside a man who smelled faintly of damp earth. He was older than me, the kind of older that can be 60 or 1,000. He wore a jacket with a reflective strip and a headlamp clipped to the brim of his hat, the way you might leave a memory clipped where you can reach it. He glanced at my hands and then at my face the way people do when they're deciding whether to start a conversation. "You ever walk where the ground remembers?" he asked almost to himself. "I try not to," I said. "Good," he said, and then after a beat, "If you see any kids running, don't follow." He didn't look at me when he said it. He got on a bus that wasn't mine and took the smell of damp earth with him. I don't have a moral. I don't have proof. All I have is a coin I can't quite bring myself to move from the corner of my doormat, and a small, stubborn sound that doesn't respect schedules. If you go to Galveston when the fog is in, you might hear the voices. You might tell yourself it's the wind. Maybe it is. Maybe the air holds on to prayers because somebody needs to answer them, or because the asking is the point. I hope, honestly, quietly, that if you go before midnight and come back with nothing. I hope the path stays where you put your feet. Every now and then, just before I fall asleep, I think I see a small figure in the reflection of the dark TV standing 2 rooms back, where my hallway opens like a mouth. It doesn't move. It doesn't try to scare me. It just exists, the way some facts exist no matter how you angle the light. I tell myself it's the outline of a coat on a chair. I tell myself it's a trick of the glass. The sound in the hall is very soft, a clink so gentle it could be kind. And when I wake in the morning, the coin is always exactly where I left it, except once when it was a half-inch to the left, as if someone small had stopped just inside and set it down carefully to avoid making a fuss. I was never the kind of person who went to cemeteries at night for fun. If you'd asked me 6 months ago, I would have told you I prefer my ghosts the same way I prefer my storms. Heard about secondhand behind a window with the TV on low. But last spring, my cousin Levi moved to Lubbock for grad school, and I drove out to help him settle into a cheap rental a few blocks from the cemetery. That first weekend, we did all the normal stuff. Grocery run, used furniture store, a sad mattress in plastic. On Sunday, after a late lunch, he said, "You want to go see Buddy Holly?" It was still bright. I figured he meant the statue. He meant the grave. People go to Lubbock Cemetery for Buddy Holly the way tourists go to Graceland. They bring guitar picks and flowers and bottles. They leave lyrics on sticky notes that curl by morning. Standing there felt less like a grave and more like a tiny outdoor shrine. There were at least a dozen people when we walked up. A guy in a red tech hoodie taking selfies. 2 older ladies in sun hats whispering the chorus of Every Day. A dad lifting his kid so she could see above the stone. The mood was cheerful, light. I didn't know what I expected, somber maybe, but you could tell the place meant something good to them, like a promise that not everything ends ugly. Levi nudged me. "Make a wish," he said, because that's the kind of person he is. He believes in folded-up traditions the way other people believe in sunscreen. I don't know why I did it, but I closed my eyes and kept one hand on the edge of the stone. It was warm from the sun. There was a breeze that smelled like cut grass and dust. I started to think about my dad, who used to play those old records on rainy days, and that's when the pressure started, like an invisible weight settling on my sternum. Not painful exactly, but insistent. Wrong. I opened my eyes and took a step back. "You okay?" Levi asked. "Yeah," I said, and nodded too hard. Just stood up too fast. But I hadn't been sitting. I'm not proud to admit this, but the feeling spooked me. I told myself it was the heat and the crowd, and I didn't say anything about it, not even that night when we walked past the cemetery again on our way to the convenience store. That stretch of road was dark and quiet, and the gate had its hours posted, dawn to dusk. Beyond the bars, the markers were a pale patchwork in the moonlight. What got me wasn't the way the stones stood shoulder to shoulder like a crowd that had forgotten how to breathe. It was the hum. At first I thought it was power lines. Then I realized it was coming from the little building near the main entrance where they kept the security monitors. "Static," Levi said. "You hear it? Like a TV when the cable's out. Maybe some old fluorescent bulbs. Or orbs," he said, and then laughed at his own joke. Levi has this way of laughing that's almost a cough, like he's startled by the idea of joy. The week after I left, he started sending me texts. The first was a photo from his porch. It was dusk. The sky looked rinsed. That kind of Lubbock lavender that makes you think somebody turned down the saturation by hand. Between his fence and the street, the cemetery stretched flat and gray and endless. The caption was, "Tell me those are fireflies." In the picture, I could see a handful of pale dots, soft, steady glows, not the blinking of insects. I thought, dust in the lens. I texted back something dumb like, "You're fine, scientist." He was studying wind energy, not ghosts. But more pictures followed over the next few days. Some blurry and vague. One sharp enough that I zoomed in and saw a light the size of a small apple hovering low, right above the grass, like a careful lamp being carried by a hand that wasn't there. The glows showed up, he said, most often just after sunset, weaving between the stones as if they were dodging around people. He told me about the groundskeepers. There were two by day. Ralph, a quiet man with a sunburned neck, and a younger guy named Gabe who had a habit of whistling when he worked. The same three-note tune on a loop until you wanted to scream. They kept their heads down when people had phones out. There was a third keeper for after-hours stuff, a woman named Dora. She lived with her sister and took the night shift on weekends. Levi met her when he locked his keys in his truck one evening and had to wait by the gate. She had a threadbare cardigan and calm eyes and a voice like the hush in a church. Folks faint sometimes at the Hollystone, she told him. Most stand right back up. Some don't like to come back after. Why? He asked. She considered. They say they felt pushed, she said finally, like the air was a person. He asked if the security cameras ever caught anything. Static, she said. Just snow, like the old movies when the TV lost its mind. This is the part of the story where I want to be the skeptic. I want to tell you I scolded him and reminded him of how our brains fit patterns over noise, how light bounces and insects glow, how if you stand up too fast, yes, your veins complain. I did all that. I wrote paragraphs. I linked a video about lens flare. He sent me a photo of a small circle of wet grass and said, "What explains this then?" It was the size of a chair seat, a darker patch in a dry morning. In the middle of the circle was a single long hair, like a thread of white fishing line. It's by an unmarked grave, he said. One of the keepers swears he saw a woman there rocking. People cry at graves, I said. That one just doesn't have a stone, that's all. He sent back a thumbs up, but later that night he called me. It was late and windy on his end. West Texas never learns to sit still, and I could hear his breath hitch like he'd just run up a flight of stairs. There's someone in there, he said. In where? In the cemetery. She's in white. She's not moving right. I told him to go inside and lock the door. He didn't answer, and I could picture him standing out there in the dim, clutching his phone with both hands, the way he did when he tried to take a picture without shaking. Then I heard the small clank of the fence. She's gone, he said finally. Just she was there. She sat down. He stopped. The grass is going to be wet again. I booked time off work. It felt stupid to say I needed to go check on my cousin because a ghost was being weird in a public cemetery. So I told my boss there was a family emergency. On the drive, 4 hours of flattened sky, I rehearsed all my reasonable speeches. You need more sleep. You're new in town. You're projecting your stress. But when I pulled up to his house, Levi didn't look like a person who needed a glasses cleaning talk. He looked hollowed out. He had dark crescents under his eyes, the kind that look stamped. The bones along his face stood out in a way I didn't like. You're here, he said, soft like he wasn't sure I was real. Good. We made sandwiches and sat on his concrete step because the inside of the house felt stale and the step felt sane. Across the street, behind the black iron bars, sun flared on the faces of the stones. A family picnicked near the older section. Grandparents, parents, a kid chasing a ball that kept rolling toward a row of flat markers. Near Buddy Holly's grave, a cluster of tourists posed, a guy holding up a guitar pick between two fingers like a promise. Don't be mad, Levi said eventually. I went in last night. After hours? That's Levi. There was a gap in the fence. I didn't touch anything. I just wanted to see if the lights were, if they were real and not some trick of the street lamps. And? He put down his sandwich. They weave, he said. They know where the stones are. They don't bump them. They move around like kids cutting through a crowd, and the whole time the cameras in that little building just hissed. You can hear it from the road. It's the only sound sometimes. Well, that and the whistling. Whistling. The new guy, Gabe, I think he sleeps badly. He hesitated. And there was a woman. Levi. I know how it sounds. She was in a long white dress, sitting by that unmarked grave. Dora says it was an old pauper plot. No family for anyone there. So the markers fell or were never set, and she was rocking back and forth like she was cold even though it wasn't cold. I blinked and she was gone, but the grass, he swallowed. It was wet like someone had been crying there for hours. We made a deal right then because I needed something solid to hold. Before I left on Monday, we would go inside the cemetery all together, during daylight with permission. We'd talk to Dora, we'd walk the main paths, no fence hopping, no witching hour, no orbs, no static. Just rows of names and dates in that section where everyone pretends the famous dead are listening. I could feel a part of myself standing up inside, ready to be the grown-up. We are not the kind of family that feeds fear, I told myself. We pick it up and shake it to see what falls out. Dora met us at the gate. She looked smaller by day somehow, like the sunlight washed her down to the essentials. Up close I could see the practical way she kept her hair. A low bun, fraying only a little, pins tucked where they'd be easy to find later. She led us along the gravel path, pointing out the sections the way a librarian might point out shelves. "Veterans are there," she said. "There's the older part, and that's where folks go for Buddy." She didn't say his last name. She didn't need to. We ask people to be respectful. They are mostly. A few faint, and I tell them to sit and sip. "You ever get that feeling of something sitting on your chest?" She asked it like a nurse asks if you get dizzy when you stand. "Once," I said before I could stop myself. She nodded. "We tell folks it's the heat. We keep water in the office, but sometimes..." She looked down, studying the track of the path as if the gravel might answer for her. "Sometimes it feels like somebody's asking for quiet, and most of us are too loud to hear how soft that ask is." We passed a camera on a pole. It had a sun visor like a baseball cap. "Those even work?" I asked, pretending I was curious and not trying to catch her admitting what Levi said. "Sometimes," she said. "Sometimes they don't. We replace them and then they get fussy again. The feed goes to that little building there. If you go close at night, you'll hear the static. Like when a radio station is almost but not quite." "And the orbs?" Levi asked, too bright. "The lights that weave?" She didn't look surprised. "I've seen what I've seen," she said. "I don't tell folks what to believe. But I've picked up things people leave, pennies, guitar picks, letters that get washed from markers when it rains. And sometimes when I bend down, I feel the back of my neck tell me I'm not alone." She paused. "That's not scary if you think about it. It's a cemetery. Nobody's alone here." The unmarked grave looked like nothing if you didn't know where to look. A depression in the earth hardly deeper than a boot print, a scabby patch where the grass didn't grow right. Dora stood beside it and folded her hands like she was about to say grace. "We maintain it," she said. "Same as the rest. People assume unmarked means unloved. Not always. Sometimes the love ran out of money." She glanced at Levi. "You see her here?" she asked. He nodded. "Last night. White dress." Dora set her jaw for a second, the way you do when you don't want a free memory to shake you. "Ralph saw her once," she said, meaning the other keeper. "Said she was rocking. Said he blinked and she was gone. Said the ground was wet." She looked at my face then, probably because I wasn't suave about hiding what I thought. "You don't have to believe it," she said kindly. "Please don't make fun either." "We won't," I said quickly. That felt important to promise, not because I was suddenly a believer, but because I didn't know where the bottom was on this story and I didn't want to step on anyone's last good nerve. We thanked her and went to Buddy Holly's grave like normal tourists. People had left guitar picks in a little line like breadcrumbs. A folded napkin pressed under a pebble read, "Thanks for keeping the promises the rest of us forgot." Somebody had doodled glasses on the corner. Levi put down a dime because that's what he had in his pocket. We stood there quietly until a couple with a selfie stick drifted close and one of them said, "Sorry, we'll be quick," like we were waiting for a stall in a bathroom. For the rest of the day, I felt sane. It was hot, yes, and dry in that way that makes your skin feel like paper, but normal. Levi seemed more himself too. We bought barbecue and ate it in the car with the AC blasting. We watched a game. He laughed at something dumb I said about a commercial with a smiling lizard. When dusk came, he made a point of staying inside. "I'm not going," he said, like I was his babysitter. We set a rule. We kept that rule until almost midnight, and then we broke it not because we wanted to, but because the noise woke us. It wasn't the hiss from the monitor building. It wasn't Gabe's whistling. It was a long, low alarm, the kind designed to be ignored by everyone until the one person who needs to hear it understands it's shaped exactly like their name. I recognized it faster than Levi did. "That's your truck," I said and shoved off the couch. He had one of those aftermarket alarms that chirped when a moth looked at it too hard. The remote fob lay on his kitchen counter, well out of range. The sound bled through the window glass. We stepped outside, and the first thing that hit me was the wind, restless and uneven, the kind that makes tree leaves show you their pale undersides like a warning. The second thing that hit me was the sight of the cemetery gate open. Not wide, just a shoulder's worth, as if someone had slipped through and forgot to pull it all the way shut. The third thing was the light. It wasn't moonlight. The moon was there, a thin white fingernail. This was lower, flickering, not flame, moving. I counted 3, then 5, then couldn't count because it was like trying to count children on a playground when every head looks the same and none of them move in straight lines. The orbs, they were there. They were real. They threaded between stones and paused near markers and dipped and rose as if they were smelling their way through the field. "Stay," I told Levi, like he was a dog and I was a fool. But Levi stepped off the curb anyway, drawn past the line where the street lamp gave up. He held up his hands like he was approaching a skittish animal. "Hey," he said to no one and to everyone. "Hey, it's okay." The truck alarm hiccuped and quieted. A breath after that, the hissing started. I hadn't noticed until then how loud the night could get when it wanted to. The static poured from the monitor building like a waterfall you could never find the bottom of. It made the hairs on my arms lift. I looked at the small window in the office and saw that it was gray inside, not black. The screens were on. They were eating the feed. "Levi, come back," I said. I don't know if he heard me. He was already at the gate, one hand on the iron. He froze suddenly, like his muscles remembered the rule we made. Then the woman appeared. I won't waste your time trying to build suspense where there wasn't any. 1 second, the grass by the unmarked grave was a darker patch of night. The next, there was a shape on it. She didn't drift up from the ground or fade into view. She was simply there, a woman in a long white dress, seated as if she had lowered herself carefully, rocking as if the air were a cradle she didn't trust. Her hair hung long and pale over her shoulder. I thought at first it was gray, then realized it was just a river of reflected light. She faced away from us. Her hands were in her lap. The dress had sleeves, loose and old-fashioned, the fabric a little too bright for the dark. The orbs gave her edges, passing behind and around her like fish around a dock post. Levi took a step forward without meaning to. She stopped rocking. Every sense I had told me not to say a word, not to breathe, not to blink. That last part I failed at. When my eyes reopened, she was gone. The orbs didn't blink out. They changed course. They all, every single one, bent their paths toward the unmarked patch. They converged on the place she had been like a school of minnows slicing toward bread. For 1 second, the ground there glowed, not bright, not dramatic, but undeniably lit from inches above. Then that light went out too, with a quiet that felt like a tooth slipping under your skin. My mouth was dry in a sudden way that made swallowing loud. Levi was already through the gate. "Levi," I said softly, "don't." He walked like a person trying to remember how to walk. I followed, because I couldn't imagine the story I'd have to tell my aunt if I let her son go alone into something that had just proved it was not interested in behaving. Gravel crunched under my shoes. The air inside the cemetery had its own temperature, cooler, as if the shade of 100 trees we couldn't see had fallen across it. Up close, the unmarked patch looked like a bruise. You could see the darker circle where the ground had been dampened once, twice, 100 times. There was a single hair on the grass, so faint I only saw it because it caught on my knuckle. I thought of Dora's hands folding while she said grace to no one. "Do you want us to go?" Levi asked. He didn't raise his voice. He just let the question exist. For a while, nothing moved. The orbs drifted back into their scattered roots. A dog barked 3 blocks away. The static adjusted itself, louder, then softer, the way a person might push back in their chair when they needed the room. Somewhere in the veteran section, a flag tapped a metal pole in the wind. Tap, 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 as if to keep time. Levi crouched. He didn't reach out. He didn't touch. He just lowered himself to the ground the way you do when you're trying to make yourself small, beside someone else's grief. The earth beneath his shoes looked blacker than mine, and I realized I was wrong about the temperature. It wasn't cooler. It was heavier, the way rooms with oxygen machines feel heavier. The world was doing extra work here. "Okay," he said finally, to the dirt. "Okay, I hear you." Above us, the nearest camera winked red and then dark and then red again, like a tired eye. The static lifted for half a breath, and I heard nothing. Not silence, different. I heard the space where the hiss had been. And in that space I felt, not a hand, not pressure, not a push, but a suggestion, like a mother at a doorway saying, "That's enough for tonight." We left. The gate clicked behind us. The truck alarm chirped once and gave up. Levi locked it, stared at the fob in his hand as if he'd never seen it before, then put it in his pocket. We sat on the step again without speaking for a long time. When a car went by, the driver didn't look toward us. When a pair of kids walked past on the other side, they crossed without seeming to notice they had. "I should move," Levi said at last. "You love your program," I said. "I can love it from farther away." He did, a month later. He found a place across town, farther from the cemetery, close to a bakery that opened at 6 a.m. and made the kind of bread that tastes like a reason to get out of bed. I helped him move again, and it went like moving always goes. Too many boxes, too many cords that seem like they must be important until you realize you own 18 of them. We drove past Lubbock Cemetery one last time with the windows up and the radio low. On the grass near Buddy Holly's grave, a circle of people stood with their heads bent together. One of them put a flower down. None of them fainted while we watched. For a while I thought that was our ending. The neat decision, the healthy boundary, that we don't have to be the kind of people who talk about ghosts wrap up. But that's not how this works. On his second night in the new place, Levi called me. "Don't laugh," he said. "I just want to tell you this so I'm not the only one who knows." "Okay," I said. "I was lying there trying to sleep," he said. "And I heard whistling." "Your neighbor?" "Maybe." "What tune?" He hummed it. 3 notes, up, down, up, with a little warble on the last step. The same 3 notes I'd heard Gabe whistling without realizing I'd memorized them. That was coincidence, sure. Whistling is cheap and people reuse what they hear. But he went on. "I knew I wasn't close to the cemetery," he said. "I knew that. I told myself that. I told myself it was probably 1 a.m. bar noise or a guy walking his dog at the complex next door. But I got up anyway and looked out the window, and there was nothing there. That's the whole story." "That's not nothing," I said. "It is," he said. But he stayed on the line with me until the bread trucks started their route and the sky went gray at the edges. Not because I said anything wise, but because it felt like someone standing in a doorway saying, "That's enough for tonight." In the months since, I've gone back to visit twice. We don't go to the cemetery, we don't need to. We sit on his new couch and drink coffee that's too strong and watch the morning open. Sometimes he talks about the research he's doing. Sometimes I talk about our dad and how his records crackled where the needle was a little worn. We get to choose our ghosts. That's what I tell myself when it gets too quiet. But I know that's not true. We only get to choose which ones we listen to. Last week he mailed me a small padded envelope with no return note. Just a napkin folded into quarters and a dime taped to the corner. On the napkin, in a hand that looked like his but could have been anyone's, someone had written, "Thanks for keeping the promises the rest of us forgot." I keep it in a drawer. Sometimes I take it out and hold it up to the light to see if there's anything new hidden in the fibers. There isn't, or I haven't learned how to look yet. When I close my eyes, I can feel a little pressure at the center of my chest. Not painful, exactly. If I tell you that's nerves or caffeine or the memory of standing in front of a famous grave on a hot day, you can nod, and we can be the kind of people who only talk about what we can measure. If I tell you there's a gate in Lubbock that sometimes doesn't shut, and a field where the air hums, and a woman who sits and rocks and leaves the ground damp with a grief that never dries because it never ends, you can call it a story. I'll call it that too most days. But every so often, when the house is too still and the static in my own head goes briefly quiet, I hear 3 notes whistled from nowhere, up, down, up, as if someone is checking that I remember how to listen. And I say softly, without turning on the light, "Okay, I hear you, I'm going." I go nowhere. I sit on the edge of the bed as if the edge is a headstone I should not step across. And when the urge fades, as it always does, I get up and walk to the doorway. And I tell whatever is waiting there that we're done for the night. The next morning, everything is normal. The coffee smells like a reason to trust the day. People post photos at Buddy's stone with smiles that reach their eyes. If you look behind them, though, just for a second, just long enough to be rude, you might catch it. There is a shimmer low to the ground, weaving between the markers, obliging and careful and older than the songs. And if you blink, you'll miss it. That's not just a turn of phrase. You will literally miss it if you blink. But don't worry, if you're the kind of person who needed to see it, you will. And some night after, when you're sure you've shaken it out of your head, a sound will gather in the dark like a radio finding a station, and a soft, measured weight will settle on your chest as if the air itself has leaned in to make its request. It's not a threat. It's not even a warning. It's a single, simple idea that won't leave you alone. Be quiet. Be still. Someone is trying to rest. I'm not from Bastrop, and if you asked me a year ago what the Lost Pines were, I would have guessed a minor league baseball team. I only learned that name because my friend Colt moved out there for a welding job and kept sending me photos of those tall, straight pine trees shouldering up out of red dirt like they'd been planted by someone who never expected them to stay. He said the wind sounded different in those woods, thick like it had bark. He also said there was a cemetery he wouldn't go near after dark, and Colt is the kind of guy who sleeps with a box fan on high, because silence makes him restless. When he told me that, I joked about him going soft since leaving Austin. He didn't laugh. He changed the subject and asked if I could bring him a proper coffee grinder when I came to visit. I drove out on a Friday in late October, the kind of night that cools off fast once the sun slips away. My girlfriend Maya wanted a break from the city and said a weekend in small-town Texas sounded like a reset. She does freelance photography, portraits and weddings mostly, but she loves the way old places look after sunset, when they shrug off whatever fresh paint or cheerful plants people put on them and show their age. I warned her that Bastrop was basically a Dairy Queen, a courthouse, and a lot of trees, but she said, "Perfect. More stars." Colt's place sat off a caliche road with a single porch light that made everything else look darker. He cooked steaks on a cast-iron pan and handed me a Lone Star and gave Maya the tour, which took 3 minutes. We ate on the porch and he told us about a job out past Smithville, and how a guy and his crew swore he saw a black cat sitting on top of a fence post every morning. Same post, same cat, except on the morning the guy's transmission blew. Stuff like that. The kind of stories you collect in towns where night feels more like night. At some point, the conversation drifted to the cemetery. I asked about it because he'd brought it up months ago and then skirted it, like saying the name made it more real. Colt kept his eyes on the tree line and said, "Hill Cemetery. The old one. You gotta know where to turn or you'll miss it." He said the road wasn't on most maps, that kids used to get there with bad directions scrawled on the back of receipts. Follow the pine fence, count 2 mailboxes, turn where the dirt changes color. He said locals talk about a witch buried there, chained in her coffin so she can't rise. He said you could see the chains. "I've seen them," he added, then took a slow drink like the words needed a chaser. Maya perked up at the word chains, which in her mind translated to great texture. She asked if it was trespassing. Colt shrugged. "I don't think anyone owns it. Or maybe everybody does." He said teenagers went out there to scare each other and dare their friends to touch the metal. Most don't. The ones who do, they don't say much after. He said that part softly, like it wasn't meant for company. We could have left it alone. We should have. Instead, sitting on that porch with night pressing on the pines and a half-moon snagged in branches, it felt like the sort of dare you don't say yes to. You just start moving toward it. Before I could talk myself out of it, I said we should check it out. Maya said she wanted long exposure shots with the sky behind tombstones. Colt said no, flat and immediate, the same way he told me once not to stick my hand into a running lathe. He looked embarrassed right after, like he'd overreacted, and then he said, "Okay, but we don't stay long." On the way he drove, because he knew the turnoff. We passed a gas station with a handmade sign for deer corn. Farther down, the road narrowed and shouldered into the woods until the world was a dark tunnel with our headlights at the blunt end of it. The GPS dot lost confidence, drifted sideways, and then froze. Colt slowed where the dirt kicked up into the air like smoke and then cut right, into something that might have been a road once, and now felt more like a rut with a memory. Maya put a hand on my knee. "If I drop my lens cap out here, promise you'll come back for it in daylight." She smiled when she said it. I said deal. And then the truck bounced and the trees drew in around us and the air seemed to change. Heavy, as if the truck had rolled down into a basement. The cemetery didn't announce itself. There was no sign, just a gap in the trees and a low fence made from 2 rusted strands of wire. The moon made enough light to see a scatter of headstones. Some were leaning like tired men. Some were slumped into the ground, one corner barely poking up. The names rubbed out by weather and fingers. The ground wasn't level. It felt like the earth wanted everything inside the fence to tip back toward the center, toward a shallow dip where the pines crowded closer but left a circle of open sky. The grass was patchy. There were beer cans here and there and a jacket someone had left folded on a rock, which I told myself meant they'd come back for it and then chose not to. We stepped over the wire. The air went still in a way that made me feel like we'd walked into a held breath. The smell changed too. Pine, yes, but under it something damp and iron-like, like wet nails. Colt led. Maya followed with her camera bag bumping her hip, and I brought up the rear. Not because I'm brave, but because I think a thing can only be behind you if you give it the position. We moved slow, reading names with our phone lights. Touching nothing, speaking quietly in that automatic way people do in places where someone is sleeping. The witch's grave, if that's what it was, didn't look any different at first glance. The stone was low and cracked, and the name was the kind that belongs to a person and a time and feels too plain to be haunted. The thing that made it different was the metal. 2 lengths of chain lay draped across the mound, like someone had started to restrain a trunk and lost interest halfway through. The links were thick and pitted. In the moonlight, they looked almost wet. Maya went to one knee near the headstone and took a photo without flash. She looked at it, frowned, and took another, adjusting something. "There's a flare I'm not getting rid of," she said. "See?" She held the screen up. The picture looked fine to me. Grainy, dirt stone chain, but at the edge there was a pale smear like a thumbprint left by a cold hand. "Condensation," I said. She shook her head. "It's not on the lens." Then she turned and shot with the camera away from the grave. "No smear, back at the grave." There it was again. "We don't do seances or Ouija boards. That's not our speed. We're boring. We're the kind of people who leave Yelp reviews for tire shops if they do a good job. So when I tell you we decided to leave then, it's not because we'd seen anything dramatic. It's because everything in me, from the soft part behind my knees to the stupid old animal brain that flinches for snakes, was saying enough." Colt reached for Maya's elbow to help her up. As he did, he brushed the chain barely, maybe with a knuckle, maybe just with the air his hand moved through. It rattled, not loud. Not movie loud, just a whisper of movement, like the sound a belt makes if you tug the end and let go. Maya flinched back, not dramatic, just a real human jump, and said, "Did you?" And then stopped because she could see on our faces that we'd both heard it. We learned something about ourselves in that instant. Colt, who had said no to this trip from the start, froze, not from fear but from that stubborn instinct that refuses to run because running is an admission. I, who had suggested this, suddenly wanted to be anywhere else. Maya put her hand out, not toward the chain, but as if to calm a dog. "It's settling," she said. "It's just metal. Temperature difference. It's fine." The second rattle was louder. No breeze, no movement except ours. The links shifted a fraction of an inch against each other, a tired shrug. Then the sound stopped. The pines creaked together all at once as if a signal had passed through them. There was no wind. It was like wood talking to wood. I don't remember deciding to speak, but my mouth said, "We're leaving." The words came out wrong, thin. Colt didn't argue. He stepped back, keeping his eyes on the chain. I took Maya's bag and she stood slowly, camera strap around her neck, the lens cap actually in her pocket this time. I looked at the ground because I didn't want to trip. The dirt had a strange pattern to it, pockets and divots like something heavy had pressed down in a slow, careful way. I told myself it was hogs. I told myself a lot of things. We made it back to the fence. As we stepped over, something metal clinked behind us just once. Maya's breath hitched the way a person hiccups when they've cried too hard. We got to the truck. Colt turned the key. The engine turned over lazy and didn't catch. He tried again. The battery wasn't dead. It just wasn't interested. I pictured us sleeping in the cab with that wire fence sagging a foot from the bumper like old thread. And I felt a kind of second-hand embarrassment, like a place was watching us and enjoying itself. Colt didn't swear. He didn't hit the wheel. He just took his hand off the key and said, "Okay," with the soft certainty of someone making a plan for a problem they've seen before. "We'll let it sit a minute." Maya said maybe she could get a shot of the sky while we waited. I told her I wanted to be moving when she pointed her camera at anything. She nodded. "Okay." Her voice was a half step high. She took a breath and dropped it back down. The minute stretched. The pines made that quiet sound wood makes when it decides to be a wall. Maya rolled down her window because the air inside the truck felt used. I wanted to tell her to roll it up, but I also didn't want to be the person who rolled it up and then watched something put a hand against the glass. People assume fear makes you choose one action. Mostly it makes you pick between bad ones. Colt tried the ignition again. The engine coughed like an old man clearing his throat and then settled into a low, unhappy idle. He put it in drive. The headlights washed over the fence and a small shape at the base of a stone that hadn't been there before. Maya leaned forward. "Is that?" She didn't finish the sentence. It was a bell. Brass probably, though we couldn't see the color in that light. It had a thin wire tied to it that ran down into the dirt, taut as a vein. Before any of us could say something, the bell rang. One small clean note. Not the wind, not our movement. It rang again. The sound was bright and ridiculous in that dark place, like a toy in a church. Colt drove forward. The bell's wire trembled and then went still behind us. We didn't talk until we were back on the road with a name. A sign appeared eventually, and then our phones remembered who they were. Maya wiped her face with her sleeve even though she wasn't crying. Her camera rested on her knees. The photo she'd taken of the chained grave showed on the screen, because that's what happens when you take a shot with a camera like hers. It shows you what it thinks happened. There was the crack in the stone. There were the links. And there at the edge the smear again. It wasn't the shape of anything. That made it worse somehow. If it had been a person-shaped mistake, we could have laughed. This looked like something that hadn't decided on a shape yet. Back at the house, Colt set the deadbolt and then put the chain on too, though he never used it. We sat at his tiny table with 3 beers we didn't drink. He said, "I'm sorry," as if he'd been a bad host. I said, "It's on me," because it was. Maya said, "I think I caught something," and turned her camera around. The next photo was one she took when she stood up, just a quick shot aimed down at the stone. In that one, you could see her shoe at the edge of the frame and the chain, with its pitted links and the dirt pressed tight around the metal. Between 2 links there was something pale, small, folded in on itself. It could have been a leaf. Leaves look like a lot of things at night. But there were tiny half-moons along the edge like little bites. Fingerprints make half-moons if your nails are bitten short. We slept badly. Around 2 in the morning, a car went by on the road, and its headlights slid across the ceiling and made the room look like it had turned underwater. Around 4, I dreamed I heard metal shift the way chain does when you lift the end of it. I woke up with my heart doing a stupid fast drum. Maya was awake too. She said, "Do you hear that?" I didn't, but the question made me feel like I did. My wrist itched and I scratched it without thinking, and then stopped when my fingers found a raised line, like where a bracelet had been worn too tight. There was nothing there. The skin looked normal in the phone light. When I turned the light off, I could feel the line again. In the morning, we did what people do when they've scared themselves. We took smaller bites of toast than usual and didn't look at the window because it reflected the kitchen like a photograph of a place that had been empty lately. Colt made coffee with the new grinder, and we pretended that had been the reason for the trip. I suggested we go by the farmer's market on Main Street, somewhere with kids in strollers and folding chairs and bread labeled with chalk. Maya said she'd like that. "We'll do that," Colt said, and then added, "Later." He had to run by the shop to grab a torque wrench he'd left in his locker. Maya and I took my car into town. We walked past the courthouse, and she took photos of a mural with a blue heron on it. Whatever tension had built up at Hill seemed to thin out in sunlight, the way smoke does when ceiling fans kick on. By afternoon, the cemetery felt like a story we'd tell one way to friends who liked that kind of thing and another way to our parents. We bought kolaches and ate them on a bench. I picked flakes of pastry off my jeans and thought, not for the first time, that people who carve their names into picnic tables should have to meet the picnic tables later in life and apologize. My phone buzzed. Colt. He asked where we were. I told him. He said, "Come by the shop." His voice sounded flat, like a radio with a long wire laid on it. We drove over. His truck was out front. He was inside at a scarred metal table with someone I didn't know. The stranger wore a county shirt and had the kind of steady hands that come from not wasting movement. He introduced himself as Harlan, no Mr., and said he helped run the cemetery district. He looked like a man who kept good pencils in a separate drawer. "I heard you all took a drive last night," he said. Not accusing, just a statement of fact, as if we'd checked out a library book he knew they owned. "I don't know what you think you saw." He placed that sentence gentle on the table and then put a finger next to it like he was measuring it. But I know what you probably didn't. Maya asked what he meant. He reached under the table and laid a small brass bell in front of us. It looked older in a way that doesn't come from time so much as from being outside all the time. The wire was still tied to it, cut clean. People used to put these on graves, he said. Not witches, just people. If the ground settled or critters dug, it might tug the line, ring the bell, and someone would come check. He said the word someone like it covered a lot of history. We don't do it now, but some of the old ones keep ringing because the ground never makes up its mind. Maya and I nodded like students who understand the lesson and also know it isn't the one they came to class for. What about the chains? I asked. Harlan looked at Colt instead of me. I told you not to go out there, he said. I did, Colt replied. It wasn't a defense. It was an agreement with the truth. Harlan said, the chains are a joke that stuck. Boys get older, but the metal stays. That place is low. It tilts everything toward the middle. You'll go in taller than you come out. He slid the bell back into his bag. If you go again, he said, and then shook his head. Don't go again. He stood up. This county is a lot of trees, a lot of ground. Things don't get lost here. They get covered. He left. The bell sound that wasn't there seemed to echo anyway. We drove home to Austin that evening. Maya fell asleep halfway, the way she does. Chin tipped down, one hand resting in the space between her seat and the door. I kept glancing at her wrist because mine still itched in the same place and I wanted to confirm she wasn't scratching. She wasn't. Traffic picked up near the toll road. I felt silly then, like we'd let a spooky setting and a badly timed mechanical hiccup write a story for us. That's how it happens. You walk into a dark room and give the coat rack a name and suddenly it's a person. The chain rattled because metal moves with temperature. The bell rang because gravity hates a straight line. We got lucky because we didn't get unlucky. That should have been the end of it. At home, I showered longer than necessary, like hot water could scrub off a place. When I turned the bathroom fan off, there was a tiny sound on the far side of the wall, something like a coin twitching on a tabletop. I froze, shampoo stinging my eyes, then laughed at myself and stepped out onto the bath mat. The hallway smelled like laundry detergent and the faint cedar from a candle we burned down to its fingernails. Normal. Maya stood in the bedroom with her camera in her hands. Battery's fine, she said, but it won't power off. She pressed the button. The LCD blinked and came back. She tried again. It stayed. Let it run out, I said. She frowned. It was full this morning. The next day, I woke up to 3 voicemails from an unknown Bastrop number. The first 2 were empty, just the gentle far away of a pocket. The third had a sound on it like someone had set their phone down near an open window, and then a little click, and then the small, clean ring of a single brass bell. I saved the message and told myself not to. Maya looked at me when I told her and said, "We should block the number." I said yes and didn't. That afternoon, I noticed a faint brown line along my wrist, a mark the width of one chain link. I could only see it sometimes, like a water stain that appears and disappears depending on the light. I pressed on it and felt pressure deeper than skin, like touching a bruise you don't remember earning. Maya said she couldn't see anything. "Turn this way," she said. "No, this way." Eventually she said, "It's fine." "You're fine." I nodded because she's the one who brings me back from cliffs I build in my head. We decided not to talk about Hill Cemetery anymore. Not as an agreement, just as a thing we didn't do. Weeks passed. Our lives filled with groceries and deadlines. The scratch on my wrist faded the way the memory of a splinter fades. You forget the sharpness, but remember your hand in the wood. Sometimes, very late, the house would shift and the ducks would ping and a piece of metal buried in the air would change its mind and then settle again. That's what houses do. That's what I told myself each time. Right before Thanksgiving, Colt called. He sounded like he was walking. I could hear gravel under his boots. He said, "Hey," and then waited. "Hey," I said back. The pause stretched. He said he hadn't been sleeping well. He said he kept dreaming he was standing by his truck and the chain on his back gate was looped through itself, and when he went to unhook it, it didn't feel like metal. What did it feel like, I asked. He said, a person trying to be still. He laughed once without humor. I'm being stupid, he said. I know. I asked if he'd gone back. He said no, but he'd been near. He'd had a job out past an FM road whose number didn't stick in my head. I had to pass the turnoff, he said. I kept my eyes on the center line. The way he said it made me imagine the trees leaning and watching him not look. Listen, he said, letting the word down gently so it didn't scare anything off. This is going to sound odd, but can you tell me something? I told him I'd try. If you were, he said, and then stopped. The gravel under his boots went quiet. If you were under something heavy, he began again, and people put metal on you to keep you there and you couldn't talk, not with words anyway, how would you ask for help? I didn't answer because there wasn't an answer he was asking for. He said, yeah, then Maya okay? I said she was. Good, he said. Tell her not to develop anything from that night. I told him she mostly shoots digital. You know what I mean, he said. Don't make an image into a thing on paper. He hung up like he'd used up all his minutes, not the phone kind, the other kind. On the first cold snap, we pulled our winter box out of the closet. Scarves, a hat I keep meaning to throw away, one glove without its partner. At the bottom was an old metal chain I'd used years ago to lock a bike to a post outside our apartment. It sat there coiled like something that had slept well. I don't remember putting it in that box. When I picked it up, the links were colder than they should have been, colder than the room. I don't know if that matters. I carried it to the patio and set it down on the concrete. The sound it made, metal on stone, was smaller than I expected. A sound that could live inside a pocket. If this were a different kind of story, this would be the part where I say we went back to make it right. Whatever that means. Or the part where I tell you we burned something and the smoke went straight up and wouldn't move. Or the part where the chain on the grave was gone the next time, and the binder of air that lived there had unpinned itself and followed our car to the county line. We didn't go back. We made dinners. We went to movies and sat through the credits while the theater emptied, because Maya likes to see the names of people who hold boom poles. I ignored a new voicemail from a number with a bass drop prefix. Sometimes late I would hear that thin coin-on-table sound in the walls, and sometimes I wouldn't, and that should be reassuring. But the randomness has its own teeth. In December, Colt moved back toward Austin for a different job. He said it wasn't because of anything. That's how you say it when a place has arranged itself around you in a shape you can't name. We helped him move. The chain on his truck gate had 3 bright spots where the rust had been rubbed clean. He said it was from road grit. I said sure. We drove a load to his new place and came back for the second round. And by then the sun had gone down. And the trees around his old road had gone that color that isn't a color, the one that makes edges into questions. On the way out for the last time, I thought I heard a bell. It could have been a dog's collar. It could have been something in my backseat settling. It could have been memory converting every small sound into a shape it already knew. I didn't say anything. Maya didn't either. We stopped for gas near the highway. The clerk had a baby sleeping in a car seat behind the counter, and a small TV balanced on a milk crate showing a show with people buying storage units. He rang up my coffee and said, "Y'all doing okay?" It's the kind of question strangers in Texas ask each other out of habit. I said yes and meant it as hard as I could. That night at home, we watched something funny and went to bed and pretended we never go to sleep with the lights on to read, and then wake up with them still on because the house asked to be watched while it worked. At 2 a.m., I woke up because a draft touched my wrist and found the exact line where the skin remembers. I went to the kitchen for water. The ice machine made a polite noise. When I stood there in the doorway, I heard it again, a faint, careful shift, like links brushed by a hand that doesn't want to be heard but needs to be. I could tell you it was the chain on the patio moving, because air came through the gap under the door. I could tell you 100 reasons. Most nights, reasons are enough. Some nights, they aren't. On those nights, I stand still and listen for the next sound, trying to decide if what I'm hearing is coming from outside or underneath. On those nights, I notice I've started to scratch my wrist again, right where a bracelet I don't own has started to leave a mark. I don't think anything followed us home. I think it stayed where it was, patient in a way that isn't human, But sometimes patience has a thread that runs farther than you expect. A line, a wire, something you could tie a bell to. I don't know what you do when the thing at the other end wants to be noticed and the noticing is the whole problem. I only know that in some places, the ground doesn't release what it's given. It just shifts its weight and waits and now and then lets the metal answer for it. If you ever find Hill Cemetery, which you won't by accident, you won't, you'll know you're close when the pines stop pretending to be trees and start acting like a roof. You'll know you've arrived when your phone forgets you and then remembers you in a way that feels wrong. You should leave then. Go back to the sign with a name. Find the place with chalkboard bread and noisy kids. But if you don't, if you step over the wire and look for the grave with the old story pinned to it, and if you reach out without meaning to and your knuckles kiss the chain, and it answers with a tired, patient rattle, don't say anyone's name, yours, hers, or the one on the stone. Names are how things hold you. Just take a breath you'll insist later was for the cool air and not for courage, and step back the way you came without turning your back on anything. Then drive away. And if you hear a bell on the road, one clear note that sounds almost cheerful, don't do the math of wires and ground and impulse. Don't make an image into a thing on paper. Don't tell the story out loud in a way that invites it to add itself. Let the pines keep their words. Let the chains keep their shape. And when you get home, if the house shifts and the ducks click and the ice machine is a little too polite, if your wrist begins to itch where nothing has ever been, be kind to yourself and call it settling. Call it distance. Call it anything that lets you sleep. Most nights that works. On the other nights I stand very still in my kitchen and wait for the sound I'm not supposed to recognize. And when it comes, I put my glass down softly so I won't miss it. And I listen to the air as if it had a weight on it and a job to do. And I tell myself that in Bastrop, in a low place tilting toward its own center, a length of old metal is moving exactly the way metal does, patient and certain, inch by inch toward whatever it's been pulling at all this time. And I tell myself that when it stops, finally in the middle of some night that will be like any other, I'll sleep through it. I'll wake up in the morning with a faint line around my wrist and no story worth telling, and I will keep it that way, for as long as a person can keep anything the ground has decided to remember. I didn't grow up thinking cemeteries were scary. My mom used to take us to visit my grandfather's grave every few Sundays, and it was always quiet and sunny, the kind of quiet that makes you lower your voice out of respect. If anything, cemeteries felt honest. They didn't pretend to be something they weren't. That changed the summer I worked nights at San Fernando Cemetery No. 1 in San Antonio. I'd been laid off from a warehouse job in May and took the guard position because the listing said easy hours, mostly patrol and lockup. It paid a little above minimum and came with a pair of oversized navy shirts that smelled like dust and someone else's cologne. The site manager was a man named Raul, 60s maybe, with a careful way of speaking like he measured out his words. During orientation, he leaned over the desk and pointed to a laminated map. San Fernando's old, he said. Lot of family plots, veterans section, a few crypts. You'll walk the perimeter twice per shift, check the gates, keep an eye out for vandalism or kids sneaking in. If someone's visiting late, just remind them we close at sundown. He made it sound boring. I was fine with boring. There were 3 of us rotating nights, me, a college kid named Troy who wore earbuds even when he thought nobody noticed, and a woman in her 40s named Lila, who came off tough until you saw she kept a rosary in her pocket. We had radio check-ins with a dispatcher named Connie every hour. Unit 2, status? Unit 2, all clear. And during the dead time between, I'd sit in the little office by the front entrance. It had 2 windows facing the main road, a coffee maker that rattled when it brewed, and a corkboard covered in faded notices about grass cutting and flower removal rules. By my second week, I knew the cemetery's layout without the map. The main gate opened onto a broad path that split to the left and right like a wishbone. To the left were newer sections, cleaner stones, fresh flowers arranged in vases. To the right, the older part stretched and stretched into rows that curved with the slope of the land. Some stones there tilted at angles like broken teeth. On hot nights, you could smell the iron in the dirt and the clay after the sprinklers ran. The oaks made long shadows from the moonlight, and beyond them, the city's glow felt far away, like another world. People in San Antonio have stories about San Fernando. Most are small, hearing a voice, seeing a light, Raoul told me not to listen to visitors who came just to spook themselves. Treat them like anyone else, he said. Respectful and firm. No candles. No alcohol. No overnight. The first time I saw the mourner, I thought I was just tired. It was a Saturday in late June. The day had been unbearably hot and the night stayed sticky. The kind of heat that made your shirt cling to your back even when the breeze picked up. I was halfway through my first perimeter walk when I noticed someone kneeling by a fresh grave, maybe 6 rows in, not far from the old family plots. They were small, a little hunched, wearing something dark that pooled on the ground around them. I couldn't see a face. Their shoulders were moving like they were crying. "I'm sorry, ma'am," I called from the path, careful to keep my voice soft. "We're closed for the night." The kneeling figure didn't react. I got closer, maybe 10 feet away. I could see the outline of a veil now, the black gauze kind that stretches from a hat. It shifted without wind. My mouth went dry without a good reason. "Ma'am," I repeated. The kneeling figure leaned forward like they were pressing their palms into the dirt. Then as I took another step, it was empty. Not like they stood up and walked off. One second there was a person in black, and the next there was just flattened grass and a patch of damp earth. No footprints. No sound of someone jogging away. The grave marker was one of the temporary plastic ones. The name looked smudged under the plastic cover. I stood there staring like an idiot until the radio on my belt crackled. "Unit 2, status?" Connie's voice made me jump. I fumbled for the button. "All clear," I said, hating how my voice shook. Just finishing patrol. I didn't tell anyone about it. You don't keep a job like that by sounding like you scare easy. I convinced myself it was a trick of the dark and the heat. The way shadows can make a coat on a branch look like a person. I finished my laps, locked up, and went home with the feeling that someone had walked a step behind me the whole time. A couple nights later, I found Troy outside the office, texting under the security light. He had a way of slouching that made him look younger than he already was. "You see it yet?" he asked without looking up. "See what?" He smirked. "The lady in the veil. Lila calls her La Llorona. I don't think that's right. La Llorona's more river stuff, but it's a vibe." I kept my tone neutral. People dress funny sometimes, funerals. At 2 in the morning? He finally glanced at me. "You tell me." "We're not here to gossip," Lila said as she came out the door carrying a thermos. "We're here to keep vandals out and gates locked. If you see anyone, you ask them to leave, and if they don't, you call the police. That's it." Troy rolled his eyes behind her back. Lila's rosary clicked softly as she pocketed it. She didn't say La Llorona again. When she turned toward the path into the old section, she paused like she thought better of it and headed toward the newer graves instead. That should have been nothing. Little pieces that only become a pattern when you're looking for one. But then the lights started. They looked like candles from a distance, small steady flames 30 or 40 yards off, low to the ground. The cemetery had rules about open flames. People ignored them sometimes, especially around Day of the Dead, but this was July. I thought I'd catch a couple teenagers and be done with it. I headed toward the nearest glow and watched it slide sideways like it skimmed over the grass. I changed direction. It moved again. I took out my flashlight and swept the beam across the rows. Nothing was there. No candle, no person. Just that small, unwavering glow carving a pocket in the dark, always a fixed distance away like a carrot on a stick. I didn't run after it. I did exactly what we'd been told to do and radioed the office. "Unit 2 to base," I said. "I'm seeing a light in Section D near the older family plots. Could be someone with a candle. I'm approaching." "Copy, Unit 2, Connie said. "Do you need backup?" I was about to say no when the light went out and another one flared 2 rows to my right. Then another, farther back, like a short line of points across the grass, not in a straight path. I didn't know this immediately, but later I realized they formed a gentle curve like the bend of a river. And all the while I had the feeling I was walking toward something I kept missing by half a step. The light stopped as soon as I reached the slope above the oldest part. From there you can see nearly the whole cemetery. The way the rows tilt and level out like frozen waves. I stood there breathing too hard and told myself I'd never mention this to Troy or Lila. I said it out loud even, because hearing it made it feel like a decision instead of a fear. That was the night the woman in the veil stood at the far end of the cemetery road. She wasn't kneeling that time. She was upright, straight, hands folded at her waist the way older women hold themselves for church. The road there runs long and narrow between two rows of stone, and there's a streetlight at the opposite end that didn't work that summer. The woman was framed in that broken pool of dark. I started toward her at a normal pace, calling that we were closed. Every time I lifted a foot, she stayed the same size. Distance didn't change. I took 5 steps and tried to blink away the sweat in my eyes. The woman didn't waver. 10 steps, 15. She never got nearer. My heart began to beat like it does when a dog growls low and you know it's not playing. I could hear crickets. I could hear cars on the main road far off. The woman in the veil made no sound at all. Then I blinked, and where she had been there was only a grave. A grave I hadn't noticed before. Set back from the others, the stone so weathered the name was a ghost of a name. It had no flowers. There was a low concrete border around it that had sunk on one side where dirt washed away from summer storms. I didn't touch it. I don't know why I want you to believe me on that detail, but I do. I didn't touch it. I turned around and walked, not rushed but faster than casual, back to the office. I signed the logbook. I made coffee just to be doing something. When Connie did hourly call-ins, I answered steady as I could manage. Later that night, Lila came in from her patrol. She didn't usually talk much during shifts, but she stood in the doorway with her arms folded and watched me drink coffee like she was reading my face. "You saw her," she said. "I saw a grave." That's not what I asked. I set the mug down and rubbed my eyes. "A woman in black. In the road." And then poof, grave. "You Catholic?" she asked. Lapsed. She nodded like that meant the same thing as yes. She came in, took out her rosary, and set it next to the coffee maker without comment. "We're not priests. We're just here to keep the living from making a mess. But we can be respectful." I know. "You didn't touch the stone. Good, don't. If you have to pass that way, say a prayer. Doesn't matter if you think anyone listens. I don't even know the name. You don't have to." That night, when I got home, I dreamed I was walking the cemetery road. In the dream, the woman in the veil stood at the far end as always, and I couldn't get closer no matter how hard I tried. But I could hear her. Not words. Just the sound you make when your breath catches and you're trying not to cry out loud. I woke up with my chest tight and the feeling of damp fabric over my face, like a veil had been laid there and lifted a second too late. I started to dread my shifts. That made me feel weak, which made me angry. I told myself it was just the brain doing static. By July 4th, the city was loud with fireworks, and for once the noise from the main road felt like comfort. I hoped it would drown out whatever the cemetery tried to hand me. It was that night Troy came into the office shaking. He wasn't a scared kid. He was the kind who laughed at ghost stories because they gave him something to push against. But he came in, slammed the door, and leaned his back against it like something might try to follow. "What happened?" I asked. He swallowed. His throat worked like he'd run hard. "Section C, the hill by the old stones." "What did you see?" He pressed his palms into his eyes. I called out because there was a guy sitting on a bench. "Old guy," I said, "we're closed." He didn't answer. I got closer and he dropped his hands and looked at me like I should finish the sentence for him. And he wasn't sitting. He was kneeling, but I thought he was on a bench because his back was so straight. He had his hands on the grass like he was praying. A little light by his feet like a candle. I said, "Sir, you need to get going." He lifted his head, but there wasn't any face under the hat. Just darkness. I blinked and there was nothing there. But the grass was pressed down. Like knees. We didn't call the police. What would we say? We did what we always did. We logged the time, the location, the nothing we could prove. The next day I asked Raoul if anyone had ever dug where they shouldn't. He looked at me for a long second. "Kids mess around sometimes," he said. "Make little shrines. We stop them. Why?" "Just wondering. Some of the old graves look different. They're old," he said. "They settle. Like people." He held my gaze another beat and then went back to fixing a broken lock. I realized he understood more than he let on, or at least knew not to ask questions he didn't want answered. 2 weeks in, I stopped taking breaks near the front office. Instead, I would go sit on the tailgate of my truck halfway down the main road, where the trees crackled and leaned and you could feel the night hum like a live wire. From there, I could see both the newer graves and the slope into the old section. If anyone came in, I'd spot them. That was the excuse. The truth was, I wanted to claim the place in some small way, to be where the quiet wasn't entirely in charge. That's where I was when the woman in the veil appeared again. This time, not at the far end of the road, but at the edge of a family plot. a bit uphill from me. The moon was thin. My eyes had just adjusted to the dark. 1 second the grass there was unmarked, and the next there she stood. She didn't move. She didn't even sway. The veil hung to her waist like smoke that forgot how to be smoke. The night crickets seemed to pause in their endless rasp. I slid off the tailgate and stood. I didn't call out. I didn't go toward her. I waited like a rabbit waits, ready to bolt if the shadow shifts. "I'm sorry," I said finally, because it felt like the right thing. My voice sounded too loud. She lifted a hand. Not to me. Down, toward the ground at her feet, which was shadowed from the thin moon but lighter than behind her. She tapped the air twice with 2 fingers, the way you'd tap a tabletop to get someone's attention. Then she lowered her hand and folded it back at her waist. I'd never seen her do anything but exist in one place like a photograph. The simple movement broke something open in me. I edged a few steps closer, staying on the path, and looked where she had motioned. There was a stone there, unremarkable, gray, the edges rounded by time. I crouched at the path's edge and squinted. The name was difficult to read under lichen. Isabel M. Q. The rest sanded away by years. The dates were short, less than a decade between them. The little oval at the top that usually holds a picture was empty. No flowers, no sign anyone had tended it lately. "Is this you?" I said, and felt stupid. The woman stood as still as ever. I didn't cross the border into the plot. Lila's warning about respect stuck with me. I took off my cap out of habit and stood there with my head uncovered. "If you need something," I said, feeling like an actor reading lines, I stopped. There was nothing I could do. The phone in my pocket weighed useless. I went to the office and looked through the battered binders Raoul kept beneath the desk. Maps of plots, contact numbers for families, maintenance notes. The older sections weren't digitized. I found a page that matched the rough location and followed the lines with my finger. Family names I recognized from the street signs in town, from the side of trucks. Empty showed only once, with the first name blurred where the printer had dragged. No contact info. The last maintenance note next to that block was from 5 years earlier. Stone leaning. Reset not possible. The next night, when my shift started, I brought a cheap grocery store bouquet and left it at the edge of the path by the plot, careful not to step in. I left a bottle of water too, for no reason except it felt like something I could offer. Then I felt silly and picked the water back up. Later, on my second round, the bouquet was gone entirely. Not moved. Not knocked over. Gone. The water was still in my hand, sweating. On the 3rd week, Lila didn't show up for her shift. Connie told us she'd called out. The 4th week, Troy stopped coming too. Raoul replaced him with a guy named Miguel who lasted 2 nights and quit after seeing what he described, simply as someone walking between stones who never came out the other side. "Some people aren't cut out for nights," Raoul said, not unkindly. He looked tired. I could have quit. It would have been easy. I needed the money, but not that badly. I didn't quit because this will sound ridiculous. I didn't want to be the kind of person who gets run out of a place by something that never touched me. Pride is a stupid kind of glue, but it holds. 2 things happened during my last month at San Fernando that pushed me over into believing this wasn't just nerves and stories. The first was small. I was doing a sweep of the back fence where kids sometimes snuck in, and I saw a woman kneeling by a new grave, a week old at most, a cluster of flowers still fresh. She wore jeans and a t-shirt, not a veil, and had a toddler asleep across her lap, limp with the heavy trust of kids who don't know to be afraid. The woman was crying, soft, quiet, like she had run out of the big kind of tears, and I turned around to give her privacy even though it was after hours. I made a wide loop to come back by another path. When I did, she was still there. A man stood 2 rows behind her, hands in his pockets, looking at the back of her head the way you look at someone you love who is far away even when they're close. He didn't shift. He didn't wipe his face even though his cheeks shone. He just watched her like he needed to memorize the shape of her grief. I thought maybe he was her brother or her friend having a moment, so I kept farther distance and kept walking. The next day, Raoul told me the family of the man in that plot had come by to finalize some paperwork. The woman with the toddler signed it with the same last name as the stone. The brother had died last year. The man I saw behind her, the one standing with his hands in his pockets, there was no way for me to confirm if he was the one buried there or just another mourner I didn't meet. It felt, though, like the cemetery holds on to people in odd, temporary ways, like catching your reflection in a window at night and not quite recognizing yourself. The second thing was not small. It was August. The heat had stopped being a joke. My boots left prints in the dust like I was walking on the moon. I'd taken to starting my shift with the same route. Main road, curve left, perimeter fence, the old section last. That night, when I reached the slope, I saw a cluster of lights scattered low across the oldest graves the way fireflies hang over weeds. At least a dozen. Even from the path I could tell they weren't moving erratically like bugs. They were steady. There was no one else on the grounds. The gates were locked. Every hair on my arms went up. I stood there longer than I should have. At some point I realized the lights formed a shape. Not a perfect one, but close enough to see if you looked. A loop with an opening, a droplet, a teardrop. The small oval that should contain a face on some stones was empty. The lights made their own oval, and the open part of the loop pointed toward the same plot as before. Isabel M. The name I could barely read, I whispered the name. The lights winked out like a breath had crossed them. The night went back to the cricket sound, and then, clear as if she had stood inches away, I heard a voice behind me say, "Don't leave me." I turned fast. Nothing there, no one, but the feeling on my skin, the heaviness, the static, the way you can tell when someone stands close enough to borrow your heat. That was real. I swallowed hard and said, "I won't," out loud to the darkness, feeling ridiculous and also unable to stop. Unit 2, status? Connie's voice scratched from the radio and I laughed a little, choked. "All clear," I said, and meant the words as a kind of apology to whatever was listening. I didn't sleep after that shift. The next day I came early and searched again through the binders. I found an old spiral notebook tucked behind a box of printer paper, handwritten notes from someone who worked the job before me. The dates on the first pages were from 10 years ago. Most of it was maintenance, sprinklers broken, tree limb down, call this family. Halfway through there was a line, "Veiled woman, East Road, same spot as always." Light turned on and off by itself. "Isabella," and then like an afterthought, "Don't go closer than the path. Pray if you have to." I copied the page in my phone and put the notebook back. That night, before my shift started, I left a small rock on the corner of Isabel's plot marker. It's something my mother did when we visited my grandfather, a way of saying someone was here. I didn't expect anything to happen. Nothing did, but it felt easier after. On my last week at San Fernando, Raul found me on the steps of the office with a stack of papers and said, "You're not coming back after this pay period, are you?" I opened my mouth and closed it again. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to. This place asks things. Some people answer and stay. Some answer and go. You're the second kind." He wasn't wrong. I told him I'd give him 2 more shifts to find a replacement. He put out a call the same day. My second to last night, a summer storm rolled in. The sky went green at the edges like bruised fruit. Lightning stitched the clouds. The rain came hard and fast, filling the dips between graves in minutes. The office roof leaked and made one corner smell like wet cardboard. I waited out the worst of it and then went to check the lower sections to make sure there weren't any washouts. The woman in the veil was standing at the lower end of the family plot, water running over her shoes like she didn't mind. I won't pretend I wasn't afraid. I was, but the fear had changed shape. It had softened into something closer to responsibility, like seeing a stranger crying in a grocery store aisle and knowing you can't just walk by. "You can't stay here," I said. The word sounded foolish in the rain. "You know that, right? You've got to—" I stopped. I didn't know what she had to do. I didn't know what I was allowed to ask for. Lightning flashed, paused on the edge of sound. For a second the veil lit white and I saw that there was a face beneath it after all. Not with features I could name. More like the suggestion of a face, the idea of one. The way a photo fades, but you still know who it is because you know. The rain flattened a strand of gauze against where a cheek would be, and then lifted it again. She lifted a hand, that same motion as before, and tapped the air above the stone twice. I got down on my knees on the path, muddy water soaking my pants. The dirt smelled like pennies. I pressed my palms together without thinking, and I said what I could remember of the prayers my mother taught me when I was too young to understand them. I said them badly. I said them until my throat hurt. When I finished, lightning flashed again. The woman in the veil was gone. In her place, no, not in her place. Nothing can occupy the same place as someone like that. There was the old stone alone, water running down the grooves of the letters. The little oval at the top looked darker, like something had shifted behind the empty glass. I stayed there until the rain eased. I stood slow, my knees popping. I didn't look around for lights, though later in my memory, I will swear I saw one bright point wink at the edge of my vision like a nod. I worked one more night. I made my rounds. I said goodbye to the trees and the rows in my head, which is the kind of thing you don't admit out loud unless it's 3 a.m. and you've had real conversations with places. I left the office key and my badge on the desk. Raul nodded once when I shook his hand. He didn't say good luck. He said be good. I still drive past San Fernando sometimes. The road there curves in a way that makes it impossible not to glance at the gates. In daylight, it looks like all cemeteries look. Neat rows and flags on veterans' graves and families arguing quietly about where to put flowers. On certain evenings, when the heat comes off the asphalt in visible waves and the sun drops low, you can see the stones leaning like tired men, and the oaks stretch their shade. I tell myself I'll stop one day and put flowers on Isabel's grave. Then I remember I promised myself long ago I wouldn't step off the path. Not even for that. The last thing I want to say is this. A month after I left, I got a text from Troy. I hadn't heard from him since he quit. It came late at night. All it said was, "You ever think she's not asking for herself?" I stared at it for a long time. I wrote back, "Who then?" He didn't answer. He never did. Sometimes in the middle of the night I hear rain when it isn't raining. I wake with the smell of wet dirt in my nose and that weight on my chest like something soft has settled there for a second and lifted away. I don't think the woman in the veil means harm. I don't think she's exactly a woman either. Not anymore, not the way we mean it. I think she is an echo that became a counsel, a line someone keeps repeating so they don't disappear entirely. Don't leave me. Tap tap, here. It's not a curse the way I understand curses. It's more like a request that keeps getting handed to whoever is paying attention. And it could happen anywhere, I guess, not just to a cemetery guard at San Fernando No. 1. It could happen to you walking past the edge of any place where names have been said out loud for 100 years. You could be the one the night chooses because you answered a question with your face turned toward the wind. If you hear it, if you ever hear someone ask not to be left, what you do next isn't about belief. It's just about whether you look down when someone taps the air over a name and then do the small things we can do. I don't go in anymore after dark. I don't pretend I'm brave. But I keep a bouquet in my car every July just in case I'm driving alone. And the light changes at the intersection by the front gate, in case I need to pull over and set something at the edge of a path where the dirt is iron-scented and the oaks make long shadows. In case the lights bend into a shape I've seen before and the night clears its throat to speak. In case someone is there. Not closer no matter how many steps I take, and the point isn't to reach her, not really, but to listen. I didn't go to the old Spanish cemetery to chase ghosts. My cousin Mateo had a research project and I had a free Saturday, that's all. He's the kind of guy who collects stories and maps from flea markets and says things like primary sources even when we're just talking about his grandma's recipes. He needed photos of old headstones for a local history piece. I just wanted to get out of the apartment, away from the hum of my busted AC and the neighbor upstairs who plays corridos at the same exact volume whether it's noon or 2 a.m. It was late September, a few days after a hard coastal rain had pushed all the heat down into the soil. Brownsville breathes differently after a storm. The air has weight. Everything smells like wet mesquite and mud. I drove us in my dented Civic, the windshield wipers still sticky from the last downpour. Mateo in the passenger seat with a backpack that rattled because he'd stuffed it with camera gear, a recorder and a paperback about Tejano history he'd already read 3 times. We met Rosa at a taqueria off Palm. She used to work nights with me at the grocery store, and we've stayed friends in a quiet, comfortable way. She's practical, cash on hand, car keys always visible, a split ponytail like 2 black lines on her back. She came along because she liked old places and said cemeteries didn't scare her. If they wanted to bother us, they would have already, she told me, tipping back her coffee like a bet she always won. The cemetery sat behind a chain of houses that looked like they were trying not to be noticed. Pale stucco, low fences. A narrow lane ran along the side, dusted with crushed shell. The gate was iron, painted once, but most of that paint had flaked into a greenish powder that stained your fingers if you touched it. A sign with peeling letters called it the Old Spanish Cemetery and said the first burials were in the 1840s. There was no official address, just the location everyone knew, and if you grew up there, your parents told you to avoid. The lock on the gate was the kind that only exists to make people feel like rules matter. It looped through the iron and around itself. Mateo twisted it once, shrugged, and slid the gate open. It made a sound like a sigh. Inside, the ground looked wrong. I don't know how else to put it. It wasn't flat like the newer cemeteries where grass is thick and headstones sit like chess pieces in straight rows. Here, the earth had slumped and rippled as if something heavy had rolled underneath the surface and come to rest wherever it pleased. Shallow depressions showed wherever the rain had pooled. The trick of it, what made my stomach sink, was that the depressions weren't clean bowls left by puddles. They were long, oval troughs about the shape of a human body. If you stood with your eyes half closed, you could almost see the edges of shoulders in the dirt, the suggestion of hips. Mateo squinted and took a photo. Rosa pressed her lips together and asked if maybe the ground just settled funny because the graves were so old. "You hear the stories?" Mateo asked, not looking at us, still adjusting his focus. It was his way of not letting a moment pass without adding a rumor to it. After rains, they say the dead push up to breathe, like they remember the way air feels. "Don't be gross," Rosa said, though it didn't sound like she believed he was joking. It was quiet, the kind of quiet you only get when the highway is far and the street behind you is full of people who don't want to be seen. There was a low wall of brick on one side, half fallen. A mesquite tree leaned at an angle, roots exposed like it had tried to stand and then thought better of it. The marker stones were a mismatched set, hand-carved crosses, tilted slabs of limestone with names rubbed to a whisper, a few newer granite, markers placed by families who still came back and claimed the old bones as theirs. Some graves had rusted iron fences around them, narrow as hospital beds. "Okay," Mateo said. "Let's start with the oldest section. The ledger I found mentions burials from the cholera outbreak. If I can match names, I can—" His voice drifted away as he walked deeper inside. Rosa drifted with him, not touching anything, even though there wasn't a sign that said not to. I followed because I didn't want to be the one left behind by the gate. The air was cooler under the mesquite. I felt that small relief in my lungs, and then, almost immediately, something else. It was like when you're waiting to cross a street and a truck passes, and for a half second the pressure changes and your ears pop. Except there wasn't any truck. Just a brief hush, a tightness. I turned my head. The cemetery had the shape of a breath held too long. We took pictures and notes. Mateo read names out loud, what he could see of them, and dictated dates to the recorder clipped to his shirt. Rosa found a grave where the surname matched her great-grandmother's maiden name and took a photo for her mom. I replaced the carnations at one headstone that seemed cared for but neglected this month, setting a small supermarket bundle upright in the damp vase. "That's sweet," Rosa said, and I didn't tell her I did it because it felt like the cemetery was watching to see if we were decent. We saw him near the brick wall. He was sitting on a folding chair that didn't look like it belonged to him, thin and metal, paint long gone. He wore a hat with a sweat-stained band and a shirt a shade of white that had argued with the sun for years and lost. His boots were caked with a color of mud that I've only ever seen on riverbanks and graves. He didn't stand when we got close. He nodded like we were regulars at a bar. "You the ones left the gate open?" he asked. "We can close it," Mateo said. "We thought, well, there wasn't a sign." "It don't mind signs," the man said. "It minds leaving." He pointed vaguely at the gate, and then at the ground. "You leave that gate hung open and the wind finds the easy way through. Wind goes where the dead tell it." Rosa introduced us. The man said his name was Esteban, but that most people called him Don Esteban. He was, as far as we could tell, the caretaker. Not officially, he laughed at that word, but he came to check, after rains, to fix fallen stones and yank the stubborn weeds that tried to lift markers out of place. "When they sag like this," he said, towing one of the long depression shapes near his chair, You don't step there even if it looks easy. You don't put weight on a place that's already trying to breathe. I wanted to ask him what he meant by that. I also wanted to leave. I did neither. Mateo asked if he knew where the oldest burials were. Esteban waved at the general cemetery, like you'd wave at the sky if someone asked where the stars lived. You hear them? He asked us after a moment, the way a handyman might ask if you noticed the loose hinge. Hear who? Rosa said. He tilted his head. His eyes were the color of the water that collects in tire tracks after it rains, brown with a film on top. They pray, he said. Sometimes the words are clean. Sometimes they're mouths without water, just the shape of words. You don't need Spanish to know when someone's asking to be let go. We stood there listening like idiots, and at first the only sound was the brush of the mesquite above us and a distant dog. But then a tight, slithering noise worked its way into the silence, the kind of sound you get when wet cloth is stretched and released. It wasn't coming from one place, it was everywhere and nowhere. It felt like it was moving along the length of the depressions like hands under plastic. It's just the ground settling, Mateo said, too fast. His voice had that paper-thin brightness people put on when they're not sure if they should run. He took a photo to have something to do. The camera click sounded rude. Esteban didn't respond to him. He turned in his chair to face an old cross where the horizontal beam had split, fibered ends like a broom. He took off his hat, smoothed the crown with a palm that had done that same motion 1,000 times, and said something under his breath that I recognized as a prayer, not because I speak the words, but because I know the rhythm. He reached down and ran his fingers along the dirt near his boot very lightly, like he was tracing a name in dust on a table. He stopped where the dirt rose and didn't touch that part. Okay, Mateo said, clearing his throat. Names. He moved on. The sky changed the way it does in the valley, without asking permission. A bright cloud stamped itself over the sun. The temperature changed by 1 small degree. The wind went from hardly there to just enough to move the hair at the back of your neck. I realized then the gate was still open. I could imagine it swinging, that metal sigh. I turned to go close it because Esteban hadn't, and it seemed like the kind of thing that would offend whatever geometry the cemetery used to keep itself calm. As I walked, the depressions seemed to line up differently. That could have been the angle or how the light had shifted. But I had the ugly feeling of walking a grid I couldn't see the lines for. My shoes made a soft sucking sound. In 2 places, I stepped near a dent and the mud oozed like the floor of a shallow stream. Something whispered. I told myself it was the wind shearing past the uneven edges of a half-fallen fence. At the gate, I slid the iron until it clicked. The lock sat there mock serious and I looped it through. My hands were brown when I looked down. Not grimy like I'd touched a dusty surface, but wet brown, like the color had soaked into my palms from the air. I wiped them on my jeans. The earth gave off a smell that made me think of coins and old bread. Behind me, Mateo called my name. Not urgent exactly, just not casual either. He had found a small walled family plot with iron spindles bent like ribs. Inside it, the ground held a deeper collapse, the oval trough longer with the edges sharp enough to cast a shadow. The headstone was a crude slab, name mostly gone, the date 184 stopped mid-decade. Rosa stood beside him with her arms wrapped around herself, one palm under the opposite elbow like she was keeping her own weight from spilling out. She nodded at the dirt. "Tell me you don't see that," she said. At first I didn't see anything but the shape of it, the suggestion of a body's outline. Then just at the right side, the dirt swelled a little, like a breath catching at the end of a sob. It sank again. I told myself it was water underneath, trapped and trying to find a path. Then I saw the fingers. They weren't whole, not even really fingers. Just the tips, the pale suggestion of them pressing up from below. The way you can press your hand against the underside of a wet tent and your fingertips make 5 circles of light. Except it wasn't light. It was lighter soil, pushed higher by something that understood the shape of knuckles. They pressed and spread and then flattened as if the effort had cost more than it gave. A thin crack slid along the trench. "Stop," Mateo said to the ground absurdly. He whispered it the way you talk to a dog that's not yours but is in danger of bolting into the road. He wasn't filming anymore. Esteban stood at the edge of the iron fence. I don't know when he moved there. He had a rosary in his hand that I hadn't noticed before. The beads were old wood, rubbed down to little ovals, the color of the cemetery's dry parts. He didn't brandish it. He just let it sit in his palm, the cross at the center of his lifeline. "It's worse after a storm," he said, "when the ground's full and they remember they were made of water once. This part here," he pointed with his chin, "I don't step here anymore. Last year a boy put his foot down on the wrong spot. It didn't take him. It only took his shoe. But if you think about what that means, what reached up for that shoe, you won't sleep right when the wind is loud. We could have left then. That would have been the smart, boring story, the one where nothing more happens. But Mateo wanted a name. He kept saying that, like names anchor a place to the map of what's real." He worked his way around the depression, reading the faint carvings on the stones that backed the family plot. He found a fragment where only the last letters remained. Res. He took photos from angles meant to coax more detail, as if light owed him something. While he worked, the sky darkened in that sudden gulf way. A second cloud covered the first. The wind picked up, blew from the direction of the low wall and pressed itself against our backs like a hand that didn't want us turning around. It carried voices. I don't care how that sounds. It was voices. Not words at first, just the cadence of speech, layered like someone had recorded a room full of people, and then played it back at half volume from under the floor. Rosa said, "Do you hear them asking?" She didn't sound scared. She sounded like someone listening to a radio station she used to love, just at the edge of reception. We stood still. The voices shifted, quick syllables, sibilants, a long A that could have been pain or prayer. I don't speak Spanish well, not beyond what I'd need at my job or at a party. But I understood little hooks of meaning. Perdón, sácame, no me dejes. The ones asking to be let out are always louder than the ones just trying to be remembered. A small hand-sized bulge formed near Rosa's shoe, a swell that lifted like something was pushing a palm up through the fabric of the world. She stepped back into the iron of the fence with a quiet, un-Rosa clatter, like she hadn't decided which way to move until she had to. Mateo reached out and caught her wrist without looking away from the ground. "Don Esteban," I said, "what is it you do when this happens?" He didn't answer for a full breath. "Then, you tell them they were loved. Or you tell them they were terrifying. Either way, you tell them you remember. You don't promise anything you can't give. You don't say I'll come back if you won't. You certainly don't dig." "Who would dig?" Mateo asked, a miserable laugh in his throat. "People who think they can fix what is already finished," Esteban said. "People who think doors are doors both ways." A new sound came then, and I feel stupid even writing it because it's the kind of thing Mateo would have teased me for if he hadn't heard it too. It was the sound of fingernails against wood. Not the squeal of a nail on a chalkboard, a soft, damp scrape. It came from under the deepest depression, and it moved along the length of it like someone sliding their hand up the underside of a table, feeling for gum. Rosa started to cry very quietly, not sobbing, just tears like a leak. My feet had been planted in the same spot long enough that the ground had taken a shallow print of my soles. I shifted my weight and the mud gave a reluctant kiss pop as I lifted. That's when the wind, if it was wind, spoke in a way that wasn't a prayer and wasn't a curse and still wasn't a language I could pretend not to understand. It said my name, not mine, my father's. It said his first name, the one nobody used, with my grandmother's exact intonation. She'd been gone 7 years. I hadn't heard anyone say his name that way since we cleaned out her house and gave away her mugs. I don't remember stepping closer to the depression. I just found myself there, one shoe on the safe ground, one flirting with the edge. I had the shape of her voice in my chest, part grief, part relief. The soil sighed. The pale ovals of finger presses formed again, quick then gone, like someone drumming before they begin to talk for real. "Don't answer," Esteban said. His hat brim cut a shadow across his face that made his mouth the only visible thing. "If you answer, it learns what part of you listens." Mateo reached for my elbow. I felt the warmth of his hand through the sleeve like a tether. The scraping under the dirt deepened, a slow drag. A knuckle caught on roughness. I looked at Rosa and she shook her head once. I could see her mouth form no. We stood on the lip of the earth and made ourselves into a refusal. It should have ended there. But the sky flinched. A peal of thunder rolled in from someplace far off, the kind that starts low and then presses itself across the underside of the clouds like an iron. The mesquite above us trembled. The long depression shivered like a thing trying to get warm. The crack that had been a hairline opened into a fine mouth. From the mouth, something small surfaced. It took me too long to realize it wasn't bone. It was fabric. A corner of rotted cloth pushed up by the pressure below. The weave fraying into mud, and caught in that weave was something round and light. Rosa bent before anyone could stop her and plucked it free with a tenderness that made the hair on my arms rise. It was a button. Simple, wooden, carved with a little crosshatch pattern on the face, darkened by soil to the color of coffee. She held it in her palm, mud slicking the ridges. Her face changed without her consent. Went open and soft the way faces go when they remember a smell. My abuela had a coat with buttons like this, she said. Not this old, but she trailed off. The wind said something else that I recognized as a lullaby, backwards. Esteban stepped forward and opened his hand, and she set the button in his palm like a confession. He closed his fingers around it as if safety could be made that way. "We're going to go," he said, "and we're not going to look back." "We have the photos," Mateo said, which I think was his way of agreeing. He took one more picture of the slab with Jerez and then shut off the camera with a small, decisive click, as if that could close a door. We walked toward the gate carefully, stepping only where the ground still remembered itself. The voices thinned but didn't stop. They rode the edges of our movement. I kept my eyes down and counted my steps because looking up felt like the kind of mistake stories are made out of. At the gate, Esteban paused. He put the button on top of the iron bar, where the flaked paint would keep it from sliding. He touched 2 fingers to it, then to the rosary. "You're not mine," he said to the cemetery in the level voice you'd use with a stubborn mule. "And I'm not yours." He lifted the lock free and opened the gate just wide enough to slide through one at a time. As he did, the wind changed from the inside out, as if the air had been held in a mouth and was released without a sound. I stepped over the threshold and felt a pressure ease behind my eyes. Rosa exhaled in a way that made me realize she'd been holding her breath in little pieces. Mateo brushed mud off his lens with his shirt just to have something to do with his hands. We didn't talk right away. We walked to the cars in silence, our shoes adding weight to the lane's crushed shell. When we reached the street, a man in a white undershirt was watering his little patch of front yard. He nodded in our direction the way people do when they've learned it's polite not to ask questions about where you've been. "Thanks," Mateo told Esteban, and meant for the whole afternoon. Do you come every time it rains?" Esteban looked toward the cemetery and then past it, toward a point in the air that was not any particular thing. "I come when it breathes too loud," he said. He tipped his hat and walked away without asking for rides or offering advice. He turned down the side street and disappeared between 2 houses, like a man who'd been there the whole time and would be there tomorrow and whom you could never introduce to your friends because he belonged to a place, not to people. We split up with the ordinary excuses of people who are not ready to say what they think. Rosa said she'd text later. Mateo said he'd scan the names and see if he could find the rest of Rez. I said I'd shower because the smell had gotten into my shirt. At home, the apartment felt wrong. The AC had kicked on, finally, and the air inside was cool and still and supposed to be safe. I took my shoes off by the door the way my mother taught me, and mud flaked from the soles in long strips like a shed skin. In the bathroom, I scrubbed my hands and watched brown water curl into the drain. The smell that rose off it, coins and old bread, made my stomach twist. I washed again. The smell didn't move. It felt like something I'd inhaled and carried on my breath, not something on my skin. When I closed my eyes under the shower, I heard the lullaby again, unwinding itself into sense. Not the words, I still don't have those, but the shape of them. It made me think of women singing in rooms with no windows, of songs meant to keep babies from hearing what was happening in the street outside. I kept my eyes open after that. Mateo called that night. He'd done his thing, matched a fragment of a name to a list in an old record, and convinced himself the Rez belonged to a family that had lost 3 people in a week during the outbreak. They say the last one, a girl, he told me, was buried without the coin because they couldn't spare it. She kept trying to come back. That's the story. They tell it like she was stubborn, like it was a flaw in her. Did she have wooden buttons? I asked. I don't know, he said. Buttons rot. Not fast enough, I said, and he was quiet for a second. We both listened to the line, to the small noises of our apartments, the neighbor's TV and mine. the hum of Mateo's fish tank in his. "You hear anything?" he asked finally, the question slack with hope that I'd say no. "No," I said, because what would we do with yes? Rosa didn't text that night. She didn't text the next morning either. Around lunch, she sent a photo of her palm. In it lay a button, wooden, cross-hatched, cleaned of mud. I stared at the picture until my eyes watered. She wrote, "I thought Esteban took it. This was in my pocket when I woke up. I don't keep this coat by my bed. Then, I keep hearing my abuela. She's not saying anything bad. She just wants me to listen." I typed, "Don't answer," and then erased it. I typed, "Bring it back," and erased that too, because bringing things back is how stories decide to keep going. I settled on, "I'll come by. We'll go to church, or anywhere." She sent a heart, and didn't say anything else. That night, the wind rose again in that shape that is not weather. It wrapped itself around the corners of the building and told the stairwell my father's name with my grandmother's voice. Softer this time, as if testing whether I'd learned the lesson of the day, that what you hear through the ground is not for you, and still you will be asked. I sat on the edge of my bed and pressed my fingers into the mattress, and I thought about the long oval depressions in that old cemetery, made by bodies in time and rain. I thought about hands that are not hands pressing up through heavy soil, and the way the earth remembers the shape of us even when we don't deserve remembering. I thought about Esteban saying, "You don't promise anything you can't give." I didn't promise. I didn't answer. I sat in the cool, stale air and listened like a thief at a door. The wind rose. Somewhere far away, thunder rehearsed itself. In the hallway, somebody's child cried and was shushed and fell quiet again. My phone lit the room the color of a funeral parlor bulb. A message I didn't open. When I finally lay down, the sheets smelled faintly of coins and old bread. I turned my face to the wall and stayed that way until morning, pretending I was listening to nothing at all while the earth beneath the city breathed, slow and wet, waiting for the next rain.